Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gouveia. I am a criminal defense attorney, and my goodness, you may have missed it all, but I just said that we are diving into Steve Bannon trial day one. We're stuck with jury selection with the DC jury, and we're going to unpack everything that is happening here. Hopefully, the audio is now better. It looks like it's coming in loud and clear, but today we've got some things to attend to. Now, I do have some actually bad news to start the show off here today is I don't have the transcripts, and you can see my face light up glowing here. That means I'm checking my emails and they are still not here. So we don't have any transcripts. And I have a sneaking suspicion that I know why. I think that what's happening is they are actually going to be sending it on, they're going to be sending it on one giant file, I think is how it's going to come. So it's probably going to come later tonight, and we're going to have just one big 200-page document rather than two 100-page documents. If you remember on the Michael Sussman trial, we actually got the morning transcripts and then the afternoon transcripts. I think today we're only going to get basically the afternoon transcripts. And so that, of course, is a little bit frustrating, but we'll see. I'm going to keep refreshing my screen and we'll see if they come skidding in hot. Otherwise, we're going to have to pick back up tomorrow. But what I'm going to do is I certainly am going to be inviting on Viva and Joe, and we have some court activity that actually took place today. So we are going to be able to go through the court docket, and we'll see what's going on because there's 3 new entries from the day. But let me make sure that Viva and Joe are going to be in attendance. Says Viva's going to be here, says maybe towards 8 o'clock. So in about 40 minutes or so, 50 minutes or so. So we'll say that. We'll say 8 o'clock sounds good. I'll do a recap, and then we'll have Viva hop on here. So we're just chatting away, right? We're doing this in real time, so you have to forgive me a little bit. But Viva will be here, let's say, in about an hour. That'll give us some time to unpack a lot of the daily activities. I've got a couple Twitter threads that we can unpack. But let's get into it, shall we? And so I've got a couple shout outs to give. We have Sousen Academies here. Bonnie Speck is in the house. Look 2G over on Rumble. We're chatting away on Rumble. Vianticus Prime. We have K Cell now. We also have Toasty Seats. And I think I have this. Oh, look at this. I can do this now. I can pull this stuff up on the screen just like the pros do. Super Sticker says Hippo character smacks his hands onto his face and looks around to see if anyone saw what he just saw. Oh, that's pretty cool. So that came in from Gen X. Paul Minot says, I'm wearing my singlet for this broadcast. Awesome. All right. Well, it's, I used to own a couple singlets, more than a couple, but we've got a lot of people here. Paul Minot, Anything Goes, Vianticus Prime, Peas and Butter, Just Cause, all in the house. And so now I have to figure out how to share my screen so we can actually get into the show today. And I'm looking around. Oh, no. Okay, let's share a window. This is complicated business, folks. You'd think that I was... All right, this is what I want. Okay, as you can see, now here we are, and this is the court docket from Steve Bannon. And so let's zoom in on this just a little bit. Several bits of activity today coming on the afternoon. We've got here, you can see a response to the order of the court by USA as to Steve Bannon. So what happened here is one of Bannon's lawyers actually left. They left, they're out, and they swapped in another lawyer who we'll talk about. Then we had several motions. So here you can see on the 18th and two entries today. One is the minute entry for the court proceedings that took place, and the other is a motion to exclude hearsay evidence. And this is from Chairman Benny Thompson. And so let's actually start up here at the top. We'll talk about this first entry, which is a response to the order of the court. So let's see what this is. Okay, so the defense now is objecting. All right, so actually, you know what? Let's back up a little bit. Let me back up and let's start with maybe just a quick overview for those of you who are unfamiliar with what we're talking about. Steve Bannon, okay? And Steve Bannon is this guy right here. And if you want to follow along at home, you can do so by going to j6mindmap.com. j6mindmap.com is where you can see there are some people in here who are sort of bouncing around. But we've been covering the J6 proceedings for quite some time. And if you go there, you can see that we've got this categorized into a number of different sort of arms, different nodes that we've been exploring. And the last time we were on here, we talked about Ray Epps. They were doing damage control on this saga. Meanwhile, we learned that Pam Hemphill, right, she's going to prison or jail, 60 days of jail for Pam. and Ray Epps is roaming free, right? So we've been talking a lot about that. We've talked a lot about these hearings that are ongoing. They've been going since, well, I don't know. Let's see. The hearings for the last, 2 months? We've had several of these. The production was created. We have insurrection hearings that started with the season premiere, and we've been following along. We are now on episode 8 of the insurrection. And all of this is surrounding, I think what I would categorize as an attempt to stop Donald Trump from ever winning election ever again. And so they're trying to beat him and all of his orbit, everybody who ever worked for him, everybody who ever knew him, everybody who ever thought about Trump, they want to sort of label as an insurrectionist, as somebody who is trying to undermine and ruin America. And so we've been following along all of the insurrection hearings. And we've also, if you're unfamiliar with the work that we've been doing, also been cataloging all of the different counter arguments to the entire narrative, to this entire saga. What are some of the counters? We've explored these. 1, law enforcement was complicit. 1, law enforcement was negligent. We talked about all the hyperbole that has come out of the politicians' mouths, people saying that this was the worst attack on democracy since the Civil War. Like, do you remember when Joe Biden said that? Okay, just for hyperbole. Do you remember when he said specifically 1/6 was essentially worse than 9/11, was worse than Pearl Harbor? Right? That's the context that we're in. That's the environment. And this is important, right? Because hyperbole is important. If they're going to be doing these sham show trials all throughout America over the last several months, and they're also going to tell us that this is the worst attack since Pearl Harbor or since the Civil War, well, that's going to mean that the jurors are going to be judging the case in that context, right? They're not on an island where they have been watching this in a vacuum. They know exactly what the media has been saying. They live in DC. They may have people who actually work in some of these institutions. We talked to good Lawgic, Joe Neerman, earlier today, and he also communicated the fact that there was even, I think, a juror who worked in the Capitol. It's ridiculous. And so we're going to hopefully hear from him later on. I know he was traveling around. He was actually down there today. And he was reporting from inside the courtrooms. And so we'll have to see what he has to say for us. But a lot of hyperbole. And, the counter to this is that a lot of the politicians using a lot of the same language that Trump was doing, they were applying the same, actually different standards. They were saying that what Donald Trump was fighting about was different than what they've ever fought about. And that's not true at all. Many, many Democrats for a long, long time have been screaming and fighting about election integrity. Okay, here's Kamala Harris. Here's Hillary Clinton. In fact, here's Chairman Benny Thompson. And we've got clips from them all at j6mindmap.com if you want to check that out. They put pressure on electors. Michael Moore said that we had to get rid of basically electors back in 2020 or after 2016, after Donald Trump won. Michael Moore came out and said that we needed the electors to vote their conscience. Remember that? And there were a lot of threats that came out. People were threatening all different electors all around the country. Trump electors were getting shouted down and getting sort of assaulted and attacked all over the place. And the list goes on and on and on. Okay, so all sorts of double standards. We really unpacked the criminal building trespass, right? In Wisconsin, there was an abortion rally that looked like this, but that didn't seem like that was insurrection. When they were taking over the Capitol building in Wisconsin, no insurrection there. When Stephen Colbert, I just learned today, I just saw a headline today that Stephen Colbert's, the Colbert Nine, right, the crew who almost insurrected America a second time, they're not going to get charged either. Why is that? Why is it? I thought that the Capitol building was a very sacred place that needed to be secured against any trespass, and people who are convicted of trespass are going to prison for 60 days. So why are the Stephen Colbert insurrectionists not? Well, it's because this is not about enacting justice. This is not about the rule of law or due process or equal protection or any of those things. This is about a political war. This is about a political battle that is being waged. And Stephen Colbert is on the right side, according to the people in charge. And so he's not going to be someone who comes under subject or under scrutiny of the DOJ. We also really explored the capital damage arguments. We talked about some of the actual conspiracies that exist about collusion and fraud, right? Viva and Nate, they had a great conversation about the other January 6th. We saw these people openly admitting in time, right, the secret history of the shadow campaign that saved the 2020 election. These were people who were, colluding and conspiring and conducting shadow campaigns to save the election, right? All of this stuff was taking place under everybody's noses. And you had people like Mark Zuckerberg spending billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars on organizations like CTCL that influence the election in order to make sure their team wins, right? And so all of this is interrelated. We talked about the policies about mutually assured destruction, and the list goes on and on. Now, before we get into Bannon's case, I think it is important to do two things. Number one, to understand why the committee is so illegal and illegitimate. And number two, why we have the difference of crimes. We've got process crimes and then the January 6th crimes. And so we'll dive into both of those, and then we'll get to the court docket, and then we'll check in with Viva, who should be here at the top of the hour. And so let's start with the original argument here that the committee is illegal and not properly constituted. So here, if you recall, and Viva and I talked about this, Viva was kind enough to invite me onto his channel earlier today, and Joe was on there as well. And, you know, they actually pointed, I got a little bit nervous. Viva was going to sort of show me up live on his channel where he was going to pull up a case and say that this case is the case that embarrasses you, Rob. And remember that we were, you know, I've been sort of had this open challenge out for quite some time, asking people to explain to me why, or show me, just show me a written order from a court, show me any official opinion, not a news article, because they just take it and they sort of flip it, but some ruling from some judge, from some court somewhere that says that the committee is legally constituted, right? That it is actually legally constituted, because that's not what we have been seeing. We've been seeing motions to dismiss put forward by the defense and other defendants, but we've seen the judge say, look, on the basis of your motion to dismiss, I can't dismiss this case. I don't have the authority to do it. But that's a different argument than it's a legally, lawfully legitimate body, right? It's a different thing. Just because you filed a motion to dismiss and it wasn't successful, it doesn't mean that you're wrong. It just means the judge may not have the power on that. And so that was the argument that I've been making. And Viva pulled up a couple of videos or a couple of articles, and he actually was asking whether one of those was appealed or not. And I need to pull up that article because I wasn't sure if that was a civil trial or if it was actually a non-civil trial, if it was a criminal trial, but I think it was actually, I could be wrong. I don't know what it was, but the point is, right, many of these judges are taking these motions, they're fielding them in, and then they're saying that there's nothing I can do to dismiss the case on this basis, but that's not the same as it's legal and lawfully constituted. All right. So now let's take a look at this actual document. So remember that the January 6th Select Committee is something that lives in the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives is supposed to do what it sounds like it does, which is to be a House of Representatives, so that we have a representative body that governs us, right? So that we don't live in a country where we just have 100 senators that just do everything they say for us. We're supposed to have representation, and it's actually supposed to be something where you have a pretty good ratio between the representatives and the people. Okay. And I think I did the math on this a long time ago, and I can never remember what it was, but you know, basically what they did, and I'm very upset about this, is they actually created sort of two Senates, right? We had a House of Representatives and they put a cap on it. It was supposed to be proportional to the population. In other words, you got as many representatives that was proportional to the number of people in your state. And what they ended up doing is capping that, right? So now we have 435 representatives, and we should have a lot more because that dilutes the representation. If you just say you're capped at 435 and you reallocate those based upon the populations of the different states, well, then you really sort of have two Senates, right? You've got one Senate that has two per state, and you have another one that kind of changes based on population, like kind of, you know, you just sort of reallocate the pie. The pie doesn't get any bigger. You just slice it up differently. And that's not what the Constitution said, right? It said there was supposed to be representative. We're not supposed to have two separate bodies. And so we should have, I think, if you do the math, like several thousand representatives, which would mean that we have a lot bigger share of representation, right? It would be one representative to, let's say, 50,000 people versus one representative to 5 million people, right? You get more access to your representative, and that would create more factions within our system. But the point is, right, I'm totally on a tangent here, but the point is that it's supposed to be representative. That's the original concept here. And it's still called the House of Representatives. And it still is supposed to be a little bit more representative than the Senate. But it's not representative in this case. And they're not even following their own rules. So we have a constitution in the United States that sets the foundational governing framework for what we do here. The January 6th Select Committee in the House of Representatives, they created their own constitution, their own ability to concoct this committee and do things as a result. And in order to do that, they had to pass their own type of constitution. It's called H.R. 503. H.R. 503, as we can see here, it is very easy to read, not complicated. It's got 3 sections right here in this quick snippet, but it tells us Section 1, establishment. This is like the preamble of the Constitution. There is hereby established a select committee to investigate the Capitol. Got that? Easy. Section 1, plain language, toss it. Section number 2, composition. Oh, this one might be useful. It tells us appointment of members. The Speaker shall appoint. You see that word shall? Shall appoint 13 members to the committee, 5 of whom shall, there it is again, mandatory, be appointed after consultation with the minority leader. Speaker shall designate 1 member to serve as chair of the committee. So they got that. Benny Thompson got that one, B. And any vacancy shall be replaced in the same manner as the original appointment. But guess what, my friends? There are not 13 members on this committee. Do you see this shall language? The shall doesn't matter. It might as well be may. It might as well not even be in here. They might as well just have gotten rid of the entire Section 2 and just said, do whatever the hell you want with your committee, because our governing rules about 13 members being on the committee doesn't matter. And if you look, this is what the actual makeup of the committee looks like, right? It is Democrats here. We have 7 Democrats. Benny Thompson, who is the chairman. We got Zoe Lofgren. We have Elaine Luria. Haven't heard much from her. Pencil neck watermelon head Adam Schiff is here. And Adam Schiff is one of the slipperiest, shiftiest Schiffs of all time. He is now trying to get posse comitatus sort of to cover his nefarious misdeeds so that the military doesn't disclose any material when the Republicans take over, right? So he's got that going for him. We also have Mr. Aguilar. I think he's from California. We saw Stephanie Murphy. She just led one of the more recent hearings. And then we get slippery Jamie Raskin. Jamie Raskin, of course, was somebody who wanted to abolish the Electoral College. He's somebody who objected to Donald Trump being elected, right? He actually contested the electors when Donald Trump won, saying that in Florida, they should challenge the electors there. He's been in some ethical problems and things of that variety. Now, if you count them, there are only 7 there. That's well, that's actually closer to the 8 that they're supposed to have. So they are 7/8 of the way full, right? So it said 8 Democrats, 5 Republicans. That equals 13. 7 Democrats. It's pretty representative. It's pretty close to the 8, but it's not the full 8. We also have the Republicans. Guess what? It's not even close to 5. There's only 2. So their amount of representation is less than half of what it should be, right? Supposed to have 5, they only have 2, less than half. These are also sort of pseudo-Republicans. Okay, Liz Cheney, she's down. I have a short coming out later on the day that says that, Cheney is down by 22 points in her primary race against Wyoming, right? In Wyoming against Harriet Hageman. And so, in other words, what that means is she's not going to be around all that long. Once this primary is over, she's not going to be on the general election, which means she's not going to be in Congress anytime soon. She'll be gone. Same thing goes with Adam Kinzinger. Crying Adam Kinzinger. He is not running for re-election. His district has sort of been redistricted out, and nobody likes him enough for him to continue to run. And so he'll be retiring from Congress. He'll probably get a gig at CNN, write a book, maybe run again for a senator somewhere. You know, he'll be back, no doubt about it. That's why these guys are doing this. So, as I've said, the committee is illegally constituted. We see all sorts of articles saying that the committee is lawfully constituted, but I haven't seen any legal justification for that, right? They can say that all they want, but it's a different story when you see it in writing. And even Judge Nichols, when we talked about Judge Nichols, he issued a ruling. He issued an order in the Bannon trial, but we didn't get much in terms of substance, right? We just sort of saw a Twitter thread that detailed for us what was going on there. And it was just essentially that they're going to be deferring this back over to the House of Representatives, that they can't, as an independent body, as a judiciary, they can't tell Congress what to do. So there's a separation of powers at play. And that means that the judge basically has to honor what the executive branch is bringing in terms of this criminal complaint. Okay, so now we've got sort of our bearing straight. We're pretty much up to date on what's going on with a lot of the J6 stuff. And we see a lot of activity. Now, that was a very quick and terse overview. I mean, you can really unpack a lot of this, and maybe we will. But when we talk about the crimes, okay, there were the criminal prosecutions are available over at the DOJ website. In fact, you can go here. If you just go to this website, you can click this link. And let me see if I can open this up so it's a little bit bigger for everybody on the screen. Here, you can go to this website, right? You can actually look at every single criminal case that is being prosecuted out of the DOJ, right? And so here, if you just scroll through them, right, a lot of these are going to be disorderly conduct and criminal trespass charges, right? Here we've got, some of these are violent entries, but then others are just sort of parading knowingly. This one, obstruction of justice, obstruction of law, knowingly engaging in disorderly disruptive conduct, knowingly entering, blah, blah, blah. Okay, but these are all, as you can see, these are all more or less January 6th crimes. Okay, if you do a Control F and you look for insurrection, you hear that? Uh-oh, no insurrections coming on. But if you look for, let's say, conspiracy, we'll start to see a couple of these pop up. We've got the Proud Boys cases, and then we have the Oath Keepers cases, and those are both of the conspiracy cases. But in total, there's about just over 800 of these criminal prosecutions that are taking place. And I've made a lot of fun about this because this is kind of embarrassing. I mean, it's honestly like a joke in many ways. And I don't think I have it here ready for us to discuss, but if you recall, on prior shows, I went through the total number of criminal prosecutions that exist in the state of Arizona in one city, in Scottsdale. And 1 month, they were prosecuting about 700 or 800 cases a month. 1 month. Okay, 1 month. Most of these are trespasses. Most of these are assaults. A lot of these are domestic violence. A lot of these are pretty low-level misdemeanor offenses. But about 20, 30% of them are felonies, and they get referred over to our superior court. My point in telling you this is that we have one city with one small city budget called the city of Scottsdale, which, it's not a tiny city, but it's relatively small compared to the DOJ. And they are able to handle 700 to 800 cases every stinking month. Okay, every month. And I have the numbers to show you. If you don't believe me, just pull up the numbers. They're there. I put them in spreadsheets and we went through them. So one city can handle about 700 to 800 criminal cases. And it's not like a foreign country of criminal law. We all have the same constitution. It's all the same sort of procedure, right? Criminal procedure. And our cities can do 700 to 800 in 1 month. It takes the Department of Justice, along with the entire FBI, the entire U.S. Attorney's Office, okay, every single stinking entity of our government, and they're making a big deal out of about 800 misdemeanor with about 30% felony cases, okay? It's been taking years for this. It is an actual embarrassment. And the reason I think this is important to talk about, a lot of people don't know context because they don't live in this space. They don't operate in criminal law or criminal justice. So when they hear giant numbers like, oh my gosh, there were 700 people that got arrested in this case. Wow. Well, in reality, it's not that big of a deal because in your local city, right? If it's a city that has, I don't know, a few 100,000 people in it, they're probably handling well, more or less kind of a same caseload that goes through. But in this case, in the January 6th case, right, it's the worst thing since Pearl Harbor. It's the worst thing since 9/11. It's the end of America, but it's not. Okay, the numbers are just there. It's not reality. They're trying to turn this into something way bigger than it is because it's a political prosecution, right? And I think I actually do have the numbers on the J6Mindmap somewhere.com. Here, if we take a look at some of the legal arguments, is this where it was? I can't remember. But there's a lot to unpack. Now, we can go back over to Steve Bannon. And the reason why I wanted to preface some of the J6 crimes is because they really break up into two categories. As you can see, we've got the J6 crimes in one node, and then we also have what are called process crimes. And so let's talk about some of the J6 crimes first before we actually dive into the Bannon prosecution. And here, okay, we've got sort of a slew of the J6 crimes that we've been covering right here in the middle. We've got the Oath Keepers. The Oath Keepers were some of the seditionist conspirators, according to the government, guys like Thomas Caldwell, Stuart Rhodes, and of course, the conveniently forgotten Ray Epps. Ray Epps, highly involved in the Oath Keepers. He was actually, I think, the president of an Arizona chapter, and he was not charged with seditious conspiracy, but his partner was. Stuart Rhodes was, and I don't even know if Stuart Rhodes, he was there, I think, the day of. But remember, we had pictures of Ray Epps marching around. Here he is in sort of in Phoenix, Arizona. That's Ray Epps right there. That's Stuart Rhodes right there. There's an Oath Keeper sign that they're marching in front of right there. Okay. So that, Stuart Rhodes, he got gobbled up in the seditious conspiracy along with a bunch of other people. Here's Ray Epps, right, when he was wanted from the FBI. They had his picture on their most wanted list. Ted Cruz brought him up. The DOJ was asked questions about him. They all just kicked it down the road. You have Jill Sanborn here. I think she's assistant director to the FBI. And she was saying things like, can't answer questions about that. And Ray Epps, we saw the article come out from him, and he's playing the victim game, right? He's playing the big, life is so hard, when he was standing there screaming at people to go into the Capitol, He was there at the first breach and no charges for him. So that begs the question, why not? Why is Bannon being prosecuted? Bannon was not even there on January 6th, right? He wasn't even anywhere near it, but he's still being charged with a crime. How could that be? Well, it's because it's a process crime. Okay. Bannon and Navarro, both of them are being charged with two separate process crimes. We can see them down here in the process crime category. And what this means is they didn't follow the committee's instructions. The committee says that you have to show up and testify, and Bannon didn't. Actually, two things. The original indictment said that Bannon needed to show up with some documents, and next to show up with some words to come out of his mouth and talk. But none of that happened. And so let's go back through the timeline as we're sort of just prefacing this. This is what happened back in September. Okay. So remember, January 6th took place on January 6th back in 2021. And then shortly thereafter, the Democrats are in charge and they start this whole saga. So here's where it starts. September 23rd, 2021, a letter comes from Benny Thompson, Fishing Benny Thompson. And you can see it goes to Mr. Stephen K. Bannon. They tell us, pursuant to the authorities set forth in HR 503. Do you see that? HR 503, they reference it. They say, pursuant to the authorities set forth in HR 503. Well, guess what? We just looked at HR 503. They get their authority if they're properly established, and they're not properly established. So honestly, I don't know what the hell he's talking about in terms of authority. Don't know where it comes from. The select committee to investigate is now created, and we transmit a subpoena compelling you to produce documents and show up on October 14th for the depot, and then October 7th for the documents, right? So now this is where you'll have both demands coming out of the committee. We're investigating the facts. This includes evidence of how you were involved in January 6th. Please contact our office at the number here if you have any problems with this. Now, specifically, they're referencing, he says, you quoted on January 5th, we have you quoted as saying, quote, all hell is going to break loose tomorrow. And so therefore, we need you to come and talk to us, right? So this all started back in September 23rd. Bannon gets this letter. Now, Bannon takes a look at that letter and he says, well, I actually have executive privilege here. I used to work for Donald Trump. Donald Trump has the privilege to stop me from communicating about things that we talk about. That's why we have things called executive privilege and attorney-client privilege and doctor-patient privilege and, pastor-pastee, right? Sort of religious privilege and all sorts of privilege so that you can have candid conversations and get your business done without having to look over your shoulder about what is going to be opened, when they open up Pandora's box. And so Bannon relies, and one of the main defenses that we talked a lot about here, and we sort of touched on this when I was chatting with Viva earlier today, is this concept of estoppel, the idea that Bannon, in not responding to this subpoena, was just listening to the DOJ, right? The Department of Justice has memoranda. They've got all sorts of documents and guidance on how this stuff is supposed to work. And they say that, we will not prosecute crimes if it sort of jeopardizes one of these concerns, right? We have to respect executive privilege. And there's case law that says you can do this and can't do this. And so they create a framework around this. So when these issues pop up, they know what to do. Oh, darn it. I gotta go ask this guy over at the executive branch some questions. What do I do? And they say, oh gosh, I don't know. It's complicated. why don't we get the manual? And they go, all right. And they get the manual out and they open it up. And it says, don't subpoena them. They're executive branch members. They have executive privilege. So Bannon says, okay, great. I got the subpoena. Let me look at what the DOJ says about this since I was an official member of the government. And he relies on that same language, on that same guidance to not show up. So he says in this prosecution, Judge, how could I possibly be prosecuted when I was following their own rules? So he doesn't show up, right? That's one of the reasons why he doesn't show up. Now, this letter comes out on 10/7. It's Benny Thompson to Steve Bannon and his lawyers, Mr. Robert J. Costello. And remember, he had a deadline on October 8th. So this letter actually, he had a deadline on October 7th, and this letter came out on October 8th. Right now, here's where he says, now this is Benny Thompson again, fishing Benny Thompson. Thompson says, all right, look, you were supposed to be here with your documents on October 7th. So he says, I write in response to your letter that you say that Bannon is legally unable to comply. So let's actually go to that letter first. Here is that letter. And this, so actually we didn't see that letter. That's the second letter. So we have two letters that go out now. One comes from Bannon's lawyers to the committee saying, I can't give you my documents by October 7th, right? He's got two deadlines, the 7th and the 14th. Bannon's lawyer sends a letter back on the 7th saying, you're not getting any documents from me, buddy boy. So then Benny Thompson responds back to Bannon's lawyers. Thompson says, okay, I'm writing in response to your October 7th letter. You said that Bannon is, quote, legally unable to comply. Your letter relies on an apparent instruction from former President Donald Trump that appears to limit Bannon from disclosing privileged information, right? There's the privilege. Despite this limited instruction, your letter takes inappropriate positions that Bannon will not comply, saying that he intends to assert executive privilege. You accepted service for the subpoena, and the subpoena required that you have to be here with those documents by 10/7. Your letter also indicates that the basis for your defiance is the decision to honor Trump's invocation of executive privilege, right? So some people are asking, well, why is Bannon getting prosecuted? Why not Mark Meadows? Why not Dan Scavino? Well, because they sort of played ball a little bit, right, with the committee. But Bannon just didn't. Bannon just said, I'm relying only on Donald Trump, and I am not showing up, period. Whereas other people sort of played patty cake a little bit, right? They were playing this game with them. So the defense attorney for Bannon is saying, this is why we're not showing up. And then he's actually going to respond and sort of try to take that argument out. He says, look, first, you don't have privilege. Why? Virtually all of the documents that we want in the subpoena involve Bannon as a private citizen, right? We see that Bannon's a private citizen. They say the committee has not received any assertion, formal or otherwise, of privilege from Trump. So Trump hasn't communicated to the committee at this time that he's invoking that executive privilege on behalf of these potential witnesses, right? So Benny is saying, Bannon, you can't invoke executive privilege. Donald Trump hasn't even invoked executive privilege. What are you talking about? This is crazy. Third, Benny says, Bannon, your letter indicates that Trump has requested that your client, quote, to the fullest extent permitted by law, not provide any testimony. Even if your client was a senior aide, he would not have absolute immunity, says Bannon. And regardless of these privileges asserted by Trump, Bannon has an ongoing obligation to produce documents. So please reduce those documents sooner rather than later. Should Bannon seek to withhold specific documents, let us know what the basis for holding those documents is. And I want to pause on this for a quick moment. You know, there was some argument about this. So Bannon's lawyers actually submitted a motion. So let's just sort of frame this out, right? From a basic level. The committee said, Steve, you have a deadline, all right? Your homework is due to us by 10/7, right? That's the deadline, 10/7. Homework was not due. So what they're telling us here is that he didn't fail the class, right? He didn't fail. Accordingly, it still says, you didn't give us the documents. Please produce the documents and the records identified in the subpoena. Should Bannon seek to hold specific in other words, right? It sort of has an ongoing allowance, right? You can sort of submit your homework late. It's kind of sounds like, right? Should accordingly, please produce the documents. Finally, we expect Bannon's appearance at the time and place for a deposition. If there's specific questions, let us know. Please be advised the committee will view Bannon's failure to respond to the subpoena as noncompliance. Well, he already failed to respond to the subpoena. Okay, this letter came out on October 8th, when the deadline was on October 7th. So my point in telling you this is that Bannon, right, is he actually in violation of that October 7th date here? Because the committee doesn't make it sound like he is, right? If he turns this in, let's say, for example, hypothetically, Steve Bannon came back out and on October 10th, he said, oh, sorry about that, Benny. I just got confused on my homework due dates. And then turn that in. Well, what if it sounds like Benny's going to accept that, right? Like Benny's going to accept that conversation or that document. Your homework is going to be allowed. We'll take it. So what Bannon's lawyer is saying, what the defense is saying, is that means that he's not actually in breach. You know, he's not in actual violation of the law at this moment in time. If Benny really thought that he was in violation of the law, he should have said, you're now in breach of our subpoena. We're now going to refer you over to crimes. But on October 8th, he sort of makes it sound like, yeah, we can continue to investigate this. And actually, we're expecting you to continue to investigate this. So now that you've got our explanation as to why you're not allowed to do this, give us the documents, right? And so that was the subpoena. That was the documents deadline. Then this letter came out from Bannon's lawyers, and Bannon's lawyers have not really been making a lot of this public. So I've been sort of gleaning this from other people in various parts. So let's open this up and well, see if I can zoom in on this a little bit. Yeah. So okay. So it says this is the letter from Robert Costello. And this is saying that Bannon is not showing up on the 14th. Okay, we're not showing up on the 14th. Not going to happen. Same reasons. We're invoking executive privilege, right? So that's on October 14th. Now, that's kind of the time at which the committee says, all right, enough's enough already. And then they turn it into this indictment, right? And here's the indictment. The indictment got filed just under a month later because Bannon didn't show up with either documents or with either the testimony that they wanted from him. And so this is the indictment they filed, right? And these are process crimes. These are not January 6th crimes. This is not trespass of Congress. This is not parading inside the Capitol building. This is not interfering with, an election. It's certainly not insurrection, right? It is not responding to a committee. It's like if your neighborhood just got together and formed a committee and they sent you a letter and you said, I'm not showing up, you're illegal now. This just happens to be the Congress, but it's no different. It's the same thing as your neighbors just getting together and saying, I don't like that guy in the corner, and we're going to go prosecute him. They happen to be in Congress, but they're not following their own rules. So I don't know what difference it is. But here, the indictment, as you can see, it goes through that litany. We're not going to go through it, but I just want to point this out one more time. They reference this governing document in every single one of these authorities, right? As authority in the indictment, according to House resolution, the select committee's purpose is whatever. But you notice how they don't put in here that in order to be legally constituted, that it shall have 13 members. It's not in there. One of the select committee's functions as set forth in House Resolution 503 was to investigate the facts. Got it. HR 503 provided the committee would issue a final report, and it's got to fulfill its purposes under HR 503. But it's not even legally constituted. There are 9 people on there, not 13, 2 of whom are Republicans, which is less than half of the 5 that are supposed to be on there for this to be a representative body. So Bannon didn't show up to a lemonade stand club, whatever they have going on over there. And now they're going to charge him with a crime. So here it's 9 pages of documents. He didn't show up to the subpoena, and this is the indictment. This actually is, probably worth reading again, but we're not going to do it right now. The subpoena included a copy of the House regulations for use of the deposition authority, right? So they're referencing their own House rules. And this is how they're getting away with this. They're referencing their own rules. And because of the separation of powers, because the court can't go in there and say your rules are illegal, that's not the district court's job. Okay. That's not how they work. The Supreme Court can do that, but the district court can't go in there and just say, well, we're just going to invalidate Congress. I mean, I guess he could, but he's not going to do it. All right. Just not going to do it, especially in something like this. So this is the entire indictment. It's 9 pages long. They're saying Bannon's refusal to provide or to comply with the subpoena at those moments in time. They're saying he was in breach. So on October 7th at the 10 a.m. deadline, Bannon did not appear for the committee. Therefore, he's in breach. Now, I didn't really get that from the letter. Okay. The letter sort of said, yeah, well, get him to us when you can get him to us, is sort of what it sounded like. And Bannon has been making that part of his defense. So it's not going to be a useful argument for Bannon in his trial because the judge has precluded that, but it doesn't make it an invalid argument, right? It still is something that is, I think, very, very pertinent and in fact, an actual good defense, right? That the committee is unlawful. All right. So the indictment comes down the pipe. Then we get the arraignment. So Bannon shows up to court back on November 15th. He gets arraigned. I think he was held no bond, right? Defendant. Oh, he is on bond. I don't know what the bond amount was. It was a high bond or low bond, but he got set conditions of release, checked back in, wavered the arraignment, entered a plea of not guilty, right? That was the initial sort of the initial investigative process of the Bannon trial. Then we get to pre-trial. Now, this is what we've been really following through for a long period of time. And you'll notice that there was a joint status report that got filed back in December of last year. And then we got additional subpoenas from the Bannon people. Okay, so Bannon actually sent out a bunch of subpoenas. This article was over from, I forget where this was posted. Looks like CNN. Yeah, but here's what the article said. Remember, Bannon actually sent out a bunch of subpoenas to people like Nancy Pelosi and everybody else on the select committee. Spokespeople for Pelosi, Hoyer, and Clyburn did not respond to requests for comments. Historically, it's been a challenge to compel members of Congress to testify because their activity is protected by the speech and debate clause. Okay, so Bannon went out and tried to get subpoenas for people so that he could actually present a defense, and the judge denied him from doing that. So lost the ability to do that. None of those people are going to be testifying. So he has basically no witnesses, right? Zero witnesses. Now, McCarthy and others, they filed amicus briefs, and we talked a little bit about this. And, part of these arguments were also making very similar arguments that the committee is not lawfully constituted. Okay, so like here, brief of the U.S. House of Representatives Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy as a friend of the court. Here, right, this is his own argument. This is from the minority speaker of the House. Argument filed May 25th. The competence of the House committee requires the appointment of 13 members, right, in order for it to be a competent, legally constituted body. It's got to have 13 members. It doesn't. Ranking minority member is a term sufficiently ambiguous as to render it non-justiciable, meaning you don't even know what it means, so you can't interpret it. Therefore, it needs to sort of invalidate the rest of the body. Adherence to the House rules is a necessary predicate to criminal prosecution for contempt of Congress. Also saying that they're violating the standard House rules for contempt of Congress. So they're sort of taking two problems with this. Number one is that they are violating the actual HR 503 formation document. And number two, that the House rules that are in place for criminal prosecutions for contempt of Congress are also not being followed. And that's Kevin McCarthy, House Minority Leader. This argument has been brought up a number of times. When it gets brought up in court, it is often dismissed with oral arguments, right? Judge Nichols or the other judges, they just say, well, look, I can't challenge what Congress is doing. Congress is going to be Congress. And so, this got referred over to the DOJ. The DOJ ran this through their regular process, and they led us to an indictment. And the judge has to just judge the indictment on its merits. So what I think it ends up meaning is that the judge is going to allow this thing to go forward. The only real way that it's going to maybe come back down would be if it goes up to the Supreme Court or if the Court of Appeals responds and does something differently. But my friends, we have good Lawgic just joined us in the house. Joe Neerman just jumped on screen, which is great timing because I know Viva is going to be joining us soon. And this is great news. So let me turn off the screen share and we're going to bring Joe in and we'll get an update from him because he was there actually in a down in the DC Circuit Court. And Joe, are you on the road?
I actually was placed. I was quiet enough that there wouldn't be a lot of background traffic. So my car was in a underground lot and I had good enough room, so here I am. I'm actually not driving right now, but I'm parked in a parking lot. And I stopped by for you. How are you doing?
Well, it's good to see you, my friend. I know we got to connect a little bit earlier and you were sort of skidding in there, right, to sort of find a place where you could observe. How did everything wrap up in the afternoon?
Oh, so the afternoon, they opened up more of the benches. Now there was plenty of seating in the afternoon. It was much better than it was this morning. I actually didn't even notice that my my video. I was having such difficulty with reception this afternoon when I was trying to get stream and upload a video that I had made, that I didn't even realize that all the way through we came out of court, that video this morning never actually hit the air. So I sort of just dropped that like 20 minutes. But yeah, the reception in that area by lunchtime, I think is just a lot of people who are using those same towers, I'm guessing. And that's why the reception is so shoddy at that point in time. But the afternoon session was, it was long. We went till 6 o'clock because the methodology that we came up with is we are going to have 14 here. There's going to be 12 plus 2 alternates, and that each side has 3 challenges that they would use 3 and 3 to whittle it down to 16, which it seems as if it's almost like predetermined. I guess on a first in, first to join basis as to who is the actual jury as opposed to who are the alternates. With the 22, they're going to carve down to 16 with 4 alternates, and then each side will have 1 peremptory challenge left with respect to only the alternates. So that's essentially how they're going to be whittling down to having a jury of 12 with 2 alternates. Using with that at the very end. It was at the very end. It was very that they were haggling over whether they'd be allowed to pass or not allowed to pass. It was very confusing as that structure is going to be. But the judge was determined. He wanted to get down to 22 before, and that way, because people in Liverpool, and he wanted to be able to send the rest home. So that's why it took till 6 o'clock till he was able to actually whip to 22 people. That those 22 were not able to be moved for cause. So for your audience, it comes to selecting a jury. So a potential jury can be knocked off either for cause, which means that the court recognizes that to trust this jury, this to be properly impartial to both sides, or a peremptory challenge that is basically given to each side number of peremptory challenges saying, for whatever reason, this person, we don't want them on the jury. Now, they normally number of peremptory challenges to each side, and 3 is a common number. 3 or 4 is fairly common numbers. And usually the way they do it is I don't like as much as the way this judge did it. Normally they'll have the judge will hear after they've voir dire and they question them, go through the judge asking them questions about how they answered their jury questions, and then they'll have the government ask their questions and then ask their questions, and then they send the juror out, and then the judge will say any motions to have a cause. And some of them was pretty funny. Like some of them, as soon as like the defense would be like, "Your Honor, will argue." He said, "No, I'm not allowing you to argue because your motion's already granted." Like before you even say anything, obvious how some of the potential jurors were. Yeah, okay, that's gone. That's gone. So, and that never happened for the government. There was never anyone who was going to walk in there and then, this guy's this potential juror is too pro Bannon. It's not fair to have there. That wasn't happening. But the potential for them to be biased against Bannon was, I would say, probably came up like 4 jurors or so, every 4 or 5 potential jurors. That it was so bad that the guy didn't even have to argue, and the judge was like, "Yeah, this person's out." So, but I like the style that he did, because normally many judges will make you burn your peremptories right then and there. I mean, okay, if I deny your application for cause, now you need to tell me, are you going to use your peremptory here or not? And that makes you're rolling the dice, because you're basically like, do I hate this person more than my next potential juror may be? And I have no idea how bad that potential juror may be that will somehow slip through the 4 cause bases, and then I'm going to be stuck with that person. So you're left trying to figure out which ones am I going to burn on. Here, we have the jurors. They can look at them and say, okay, out of these 22, these are the 3 absolute nightmares. These are the worst I don't want to have in here. And it's much less rolling the dice for either. So I think that's a fairer way to enable counsel to figure out what they think is the fair for them. So I think that's a better system.
Yeah, that's interesting. And this is such a confusing part of practice. A lot of people, I think, don't understand how how dynamic and how different jury selection can be from courtroom to courtroom. It should almost be like more organized, I would think, but judges have different ways they like to do it. And, I know you've covered a lot of these trials, and we covered, even like the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. Remember that judge sort of made him pick the alternates with like the rolling bingo thing, and they pick the alternates that way. And then, the balls drop out, and he's like, and so like, so it can be, that was a state trial. This is a federal trial. But it is weird. And we talked earlier on Viva's show about sort of the musical chairs game that the judge, I forget, the judge in the Sussman trial had, and and even reading the transcripts, it was hard to sort of piece it together. And the court clerks in there, they were having to explain it to the multiple attorneys on how they run things. And it was just a sort of it's a weird system, and every judge does it a little bit differently. So,
and you would think at the very least in one courthouse, it would be uniform from one judge to another within a courthouse. Like this rules of how to do it in the district court of DC. But it's not like that at all. It literally will change from one to the next. One room over, he'll do a whole different system than this judge over here. So, and you just gotta roll with the punches. And whatever. I like the idea of picking alternates at the end, only because I think that keeps the alternates more involved. Because if you think you're going to be all the way through the trial, I think you're much more locked in than if you look at yourself as a potential, as an alternate, and I'm not going to weigh in anyway. So you might be zoning out half time, and then sure enough, one of the original 12 has a problem, and you need to step in, and you're really only paying attention like 25-30% of the time, thinking that it doesn't really matter for you to listen. I do actually prefer Schroeder's system as far as having the alternates at the end. And honestly, it was so confusing with the way he hit it up that I'm not even sure they're going to tell them who's real, who's alternate. They might see 16 of them at a time. I'm not sure at what point those last peremptory challenges are going to be burned. But what we this certainly, with respect to whittling down at least to 16, that's going to happen in chambers outside of our view, outside the view of the judge, and who they decide to strike, and which ones are going to be struck by the government as opposed to, what's struck or stricken? I think it's stricken. Well, which one's stricken by the government, which one's stricken by the defense? That's something we're going to have to speculate on and try and figure out on our own, and we'll never know that we got it right. I'll tell you this one. I'll tell you this much. For my money, is the last potential juror who made it on there was a person walk up, each person, so I'm trying to just sort of get their intersectionality, and some of them trying to figure out what age they are or what race they are, because a lot of people care about as far as trying to figure out what a jury is of. When that guy walked up there, I was like, I just wrote down, I guess their age, and I wrote down white male, 14 years old, because that's how the guy looked. And it turned out he's been a practicing attorney for like the last 8 years, and
that's funny.
And he starts explaining how he worked as like special counsel, and he's working for the Attorney General in New Jersey for 5 years. And I'm thinking, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, this guy, if you're attorney in the state of New Jersey for 5 years, you are very politically connected to the Democrats. And as an attorney, who he said part of his role was issuing subpoenas on a regular basis in a civil context, not in a criminal context, but still, you know that if he gets on that jury, that guy is going to be the owner who matters. And whatever decision he makes, 9 times out of 10, you can expect the rest of the jury is going to be ignorant about the law, ignorant about how these things work, the person, and you're basically advocating to a jury of one, and considering his strong Democratic affiliation, I would be that's one person who I was like, no way in hell I would ever let that guy in the jury if I was Bannon's counsel there, because he's so likely to dominate the jury and dominate them in a negative way that would be the first one I would strike off the bat.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it sounds like then they're going to, as you said, they're going to go back and they'll probably take like a whole inventory of the entire panel. They'll pick their 3 peremptories, and, guys like that, you would imagine would be on it. Now, my question, of course, is going to be, you might be able to sort of piece all of that together, because you can see the jurors, like you can see what they look like, and you can sort of follow along with them. Yeah.
Yes.
So we had an issue.
I actually moved my seats. I moved my seats because I have poor vision. So I had my seat to be. I was sitting the closest one to the juror came up there and answering questions, so I could take down their demographics and make sure that, like, I can give an overall assessment that basically there are 12 men, 10 women from the potential jurors, out of which 12 of them are white, a pretty even mixture of male and female amongst the white. There's 7 black and 3 that I would say are mixed race that I can't figure out exactly what they are, whether Pakistani, they look like whether Middle Eastern or Far East. I mean, they didn't seem like any of them would qualify as what most people picture as being Asian, but more just dark skin. And I was like, I don't know if that's Middle East. I don't know if that's more from, like, the Pakistan Indian region, but they certainly don't look like they can neatly fit into a white or a typical black person. For whatever those demographics matter, I don't know if they matter at all personally. In this context, certainly, I don't think that matters very much.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that. You had a good point on Viva's channel earlier in the day talking about, maybe selecting or optimizing for certain jurors just because you'd kind of go against the standard narrative because the playbook is different in DC. And we saw this in the Sussman trial. I mean, it's almost every single person that we covered there had some sort of Democratic connections. And there were 2 people on the Sussman trial that I was like shocked. We couldn't figure out how the peremptories work or how the judge ultimately sort of selected because the transcript was a little bit difficult to read. But there were people on there that said that they had like visceral reactions to Donald Trump, to his name, visceral reactions. And then they sort of protect. Yeah. But they would say, well, this trial doesn't involve Donald Trump. And you'd say, okay, that's true. Like, he's not on trial here, but this is a trial that is kind of about Donald Trump, right? The whole trial is about Donald Trump. So, like, that's a convenient excuse for you. But the reality is that, these things are very interconnected. And how do you get a fair trial when you've got, a whole select committee beating on this thing like a dead horse over the last 18 months?
Now, to be fair, the judge really seemed to bend over backwards to err on the side of caution when he smelled political connections in favor of Bannon. Meaning, just when there was someone whose mother works for a congressman, that's what we have here in DC. You don't really think of, because the world I come from, even in New York, where it's like, you have a lot of big players in New York. When you go into the jury pool, it's not like every other person that knows has like a relative working in the cap or working for a senator or working, in the State Department or as an attorney for some organization. But here, dealing with Washington, D.C., people who are living here, if they themselves are not working for some sort of government-related thing, many of them have a very close family relative who is. And he did a fairly good job as far as just giving the benefit of the doubt. And he actually used this line a couple of times. He's like, we have a wide enough jury pool left over. I think we should err on the side of caution and just knock this one out for cause and try and find someone who potentially has less issues. And I thought that was, I'm not sure if he was motivated by a fear of having some sort of appeal issue, or if it's more a matter of that he was feeling sympathetic to the very thin pool of talent from the Bannon perspective that he had there, that he was trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. But one way or another, he definitely was. If you were Steve Bannon, very happy today with the way the judge approached his jury pool and knocking people out. He was definitely erring more in favor of Steve Bannon today, which may surprise you if you heard the way he ruled on these motions, where he's been very harsh on the defense. It seems as if he's really got it in for Bannon. My takeaway, I was like, there's no way you can read this. There's no way Bannon could have been at all disappointed with the way that he ruled on it, because practically every single time his attorney got up and made a motion, the judge granted his motion and excluded it for cause. So,
but that's interesting.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But the point that I was making is, some people, there's really no cause argument you can make, because what are you going to say? The guy has must have strong Democratic connections because he works for New Jersey. He works for the New Jersey Secretary of State, Attorney General's office. That's not a fair for cause. That's not a fair motion to make for cause. His attorneys were not pushing the envelope unless there was some sort of expression by the person where there was an admission that they were linked to somebody in Washington who was in political power. I cut you off though. Why don't you ask me your question?
Well, no, I was going to follow up on I forget what I was going to ask. I just put on slow mode because somebody was yelling at me to put on slow mode. But what were we talking about right before that? I can't remember.
I was saying how generous that the judge was being to
that's right.
counsel.
Yeah. So that's right. And I think that's an interesting report from you. Now, I think that you're right about that, like dead right about that, because I saw a clip right before we hopped on here as you were speaking that you reminded me of, that Bannon actually came out and he addressed the media and they asked him, do you think you're going to get a fair trial? Like, do you think the jury is going to be fair? And he said, yes. He said, yeah, I do. I think I'm going to get a fair trial. And my original thought on that was, maybe he's just saying that, like his attorney is a good lawyer and coached him and say, hey, don't go out there and throw a bunch of shade on the trial, right, on the proceedings, because if you go out there and you start running your mouth, the judge is not going to be happy about that, right? Like the prosecutors are going to come back in and they're going to say, judge, he's talking all sorts of nonsense and he might get reprimanded or whatever. So I thought that his reaction to the media was just good lawyering, right? It was just a lawyer who was coaching him well. But your take on it is maybe he does feel good. He kind of got a fair shake given a DC environment where there's not a lot of good potential for good jurors. And maybe he feels like he got a pretty fair shake out of it.
Well, I mean, look, coming out last week, it was hard for the judge to be as aggressive against him today as he was last week. And perhaps I think it's a mixture of both. I think he saw that the judge was giving his attorney every benefit of doubt, and I think it also was probably good coaching on the part of his counsel. I credit both there on that, because I mean, if I was in his shoes, I'd be feeling, I don't know how I'm ever going to get a fair jury in Washington D.C. with a judge who's ruling against me and stripping me of one affirmative defense after another. I was like, I don't know how I'm ever going to get a fair shake here. And frankly, you and I are both of the opinion that he's a walking dead man with respect to winning in this case. So I don't know how much he actually can really believe that. A part of me questions whether he actually is worried about serving time. I think to a degree it's possible. And I was speculating about this with someone who's a really big name. I'm not gonna name drop here. I'll save it for my own stream when I name drop. So, but
yeah, go to Joe's channel to hear it.
No, but I was speculating with someone, and I was like, a part of me sort of feels he's sitting there like he's in a dentist office, not even dentist office. Like it's almost like he's just in a waiting room for like someone he's like bored. Whenever there's like a phone, sometimes when there's sensitive conversation, they play what's called a husher. So what happens then is question 24 was, have you or a close family member ever been a victim of a crime? And if so, and if they say yes, then they want to hear details about it. And the judge, for each juror who said yes to that, which was pretty much like every other juror, they would always say, look, you can either go publicly on the record with this, or if it's confidential, in that case, we can put a husher on so that way only the parties who need to hear it will hear it. And that happened probably, I don't know, 8 to a dozen times over the course of the day, from what I saw. And their phones. So what happens is they play this white noise music for the gallery, and by the juror, there's a phone for the juror to pick up, and the judge has a phone they pick up, and each member of the council and Bannon have their own phone, and Bannon doesn't even pick up the phone to like listen. It's like he's just bored. It's like all right, and that's why like a part of me looks at him like he doesn't care if he gets convicted. I think he feels as if he gets convicted, he doesn't want to admit that he's comfortable being convicted. I think part of him kind of likes the idea of being a martyr, and that if he gets convicted in this, this show trial is now going so far as to convict him on the basis of his connections with Donald Trump. That's how he'll play it. And if he spends a couple of months in jail, or on the outside 2 years, which he figures he'll probably get, he'll probably get reduced at some point. I don't think he expects to spend 2 years, which is the maximum sentence he can get. I think a part of him looks at this as if there is no greater martyrdom he could have than to become the incarcerated political enemy of the left. And that's why I think he feels like this is a win-win for him. Like I don't think he's afraid. I really don't.
Yeah, Joe, I think that you're onto something there. I think that I agree with you. I saw him when he was finishing up his final pretrial conference, where he actually went to court one of those days, and I thought he was sort of like laughing. He was like skipping into court. He was sort of like jokey about it. He was kind of communicating with the press, sort of saying that, he's going to get better ratings. I'm going to get bigger ratings than the J6 committee and all of this stuff. And, I am a criminal defense attorney. I've represented a lot of people. I've represented people with some bravado, outside of court, people with sort of some confidence, right? Some sort of stand. And sometimes it doesn't work out all that well, but this is a different situation. And a big part of what I was thinking is that, Bannon knows that maybe the political tides are changing, and that maybe, an election happens and there's, a big changing of the tide. But let me bring in Viva here. Now, Viva just joined us, and Viva is somebody who is doing a deep dive recap on this puppy, and he just took his headphones. Can you hear us, Viva?
We don't hear you.
Well, we can't hear you, Viva. So we can't hear you. I don't know if you can hear us, but there is a microphone, but I know it's Restream. I know you guys use Streamlabs all the time. This is Restream, so there is a mic button, and you may need to set the audio settings. Let me throw you out, Viva, and then give me. Okay, you're out. Give me a thumbs up when you're ready to come back in and you got your audio fixed. So, but Joe, I think you're right onto something about that. I mean, I'm not so sure that he's too concerned about it. I think he could probably do 60 days standing on his head, and it's just not that big of a deal.
Right. It's not like he's going to be thrown in prison like Oz or something like that either. Like I don't know what kind of prison he's going to go in, but I don't think he's going to be in some Gen Pop type of thing. That's just not the image I get here. Or that he's going to be like, unfortunately, many of the other January 6th defendants who are left in solitary confinement for for months, and ridiculous type of punishments that we hear about the handful of these January 6th people from the few clips that I've managed to read on them. But in fact, one of the people who got thrown off, one of the jurors who got thrown off, was screaming about how the political elite needs to be held accountable for all the wrongs that they've committed. Hey, Viva.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
we got you.
Now we're good.
Yeah, I've got no good mic and no good camera, but anything is better than nothing.
You look beautiful.
Hold on, let me just spread it down and get my blue steel on. Joe, are you in your car stealing my mojo?
I totally am. You inspired me. I'll tell you, the very first videos I ever made were in my car, and I was like, if Viva can get away with it, why can't I? I even once closed out a video saying, and in homage to Viva Fry, booyah!
But it shows you it's quality over whatever the other thing is in your car. It doesn't matter. We need to know what's going on. Are you driving now, Joe? Because you had a fender bender this morning. You don't want to have another one.
That's true.
Yeah. So Viva, we were looking to get from you sort of, right? Give us an update on what you're working on, right? Because you're doing this thing with the Post Millennial. I saw you tweeted that this morning, and you're doing a recap on Bannon, and you're pretty plugged in with the crew over there. So what are you working on?
Well, I'm doing like the daily after the day a recap analysis from a know nothing Canadian perspective of what's going on, integrating both of your input, because Joe, you're on the ground. Posobiec is there. He lives in DC or nearby. He's there. So he's he showed up for the last few hours of the trial today. What happened? What did I do? Oh, he's smoking the vape?
No. Joe said that he was palling around with some big names, but he wasn't going to drop the names on this channel. And you didn't either, of course. But I
knew nothing. I haven't been watching, but I know Posobiec was there because at one point he tweeted, Joe, what was it? Someone who said that their mother was involved in something or like was involved in a campaign.
One woman said that her mother had been a staffer for some Democratic Republican for the last 10 years. And that she had conversations with her about changes that happened with security after January 6th. So
can you imagine that the people who are now going to be judge and jury and they're just going to be jury. These people were scared about January 6th. And the change for jurisdiction was not granted in as much as one was made. This is where Bannon is going to be sitting trial now. In an area where people felt scared. AOC in another building, away from the incident, where she now recognizes the police were opening the doors. They were scared, and these are the people who are going to try Bannon after having acquitted Sussman. Have fun. Have fun. I mean, it's a joke.
Yeah, but as I was explaining before you popped on here, I think out of respect for that the judge was bending over backwards to really knock out anyone who was raised as a for-cause issue by Bannon's counsel. And sometimes it was really borderline, and the judge said, this is really kind of borderline, but we have such a deep pool of jurors. Let's err on the side of caution and excuse this potential juror for cause. Now, the cynic will say that he was doing that. The cynic will say, and I know that you might be thinking he's doing that to make it harder to appeal, and that's possible. But Bannon's pleased with the way the judge acted, and the whole time I was watching, I was thinking to myself, if you are Bannon and you're going to get acquitted, assuming you can't be happier with the way the judge was ruling all day today on potential knockouts.
I'll just interject. Bannon is not expecting to get acquitted. My question is, when the judge says we've got such a deep pool of jurors, what does that mean? I mean, a deep pool of salt water is still salt water through and through. So
it means he's going to just keep going until somebody gives him the answers that he likes, and he can shove them on the jury panel, right? I mean, he's fishing from the same pond, so he knows he's going to catch the same type of fish. But you're going to get some people who get on there and they say, oh, yeah, no, I can. Oh, I know who Bannon is. I know who Trump is. No, I can set all of that aside. Don't worry about it. And they just get this little grin on their face because they know, right? They get on there and they're going to be able to, like Joe was describing earlier with, especially if you get somebody who is kind of that alpha, top dog personality, you might just get one of those people on and it commandeers the whole stinking panel.
And I'll tell you this much. Some people. No, I was saying that some people were very Some people were very overt with how much they dislike Trump and or Bannon, and said that they don't think that they could be impartial. And those people, I have pure respect for them. I'm like, you know what? You're coming from that side of the political aisle. You recognize that there's no way you can really be fair here. The ones that really turned my stomach were the ones who were. There was one guy who got up and was shouting about how this January 6th hearing is the most important thing that they ever had before, and that we need to do everything we can to enable this committee to dig as deep as possible so we can get to the truth of this matter and to the bottom of things here. And I'm very confident that I could be impartial with respect to Bannon. And I'm sitting there saying, "Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? You're sitting here soaking in the January like it's gospel." He was literally taking like it was gospel and telling me, saying how everyone has a duty to do whatever they can to help this January. I can be totally impartial about Steve nubbing his nose at that subpoena issued by the January 6th committee. It was a joke.
Let me ask you the obvious question. I don't ask it for any other reason, just to know. Demographic. Are we looking at a 50-year-old white male? Are we looking at a 35-year-old female? That individual in particular, you saw him viva voce, demographic-wise.
35 white, I would say 30 to 35 white male. And yeah, I wrote very offensive things about him in my notes that I'm not gonna taint Robert. Yeah, I wrote very offensive things involving children in my notes about this guy. So yeah, I won't taint him further than that. But yeah, this guy made me so angry. He was making me really angry because he was trying so hard to get into the jury while it was so ready. He knows how he's voting on this, and he's been praying to get on the jury.
For those of us who don't appreciate what this looks like, this individual is pleading to a judge, counsel, and parties. But like, what's the scene? Is it like a theater? Is he pleading to like dozens of people, hundreds, or 6 when he wants to get on the jury? Okay,
so the way it's set up is like this. They bring the jury in there. In the gallery, I would estimate there's roughly 50 to 60 of us. That's my rough estimate. Maybe as many as 75. People are coming and going, and I was sitting in this. I situated myself as close as possible to the juror. Eyes are so poor. I was like, I want to know whether I was trying to know the demographic and what these people look like, and they had to walk past me on the way out, and so they're walking 5 feet from me. So I was positive that I knew like who I'm at, what I'm looking at, and getting that I could ID them later on if I had to. But so there's a lot of people sitting behind me and over to my right, excuse me. And so that's the gallery. He comes up there. There's a few bailiffs and clerks around there. There's a court reporter. There's a judge. There are 3 attorneys for the government, 3 for the Bannon himself. So that's basically the layout. It's a very wide room. It's like
so when this guy is
75 people.
So, but when this guy is like pleading with the room to, ostensibly to get on the jury, he's got a big crowd. Mm-hmm. He's pleading not to just a judge and the parties, to a room full of people.
Well, that's the whole gallery is sitting there watching him. I mean, he's not really appealing to us. He's trying to make himself as impartial as possible so he doesn't get knocked out by either side or by the judge. So his goal there is to basically, if you want to get on the jury and you're sitting in the pool and you're trying to get on the jury, your goal is basically to come across as if you know as little as possible about Bannon, about any of these things here, and that you don't have any reason to really feel any taint against someone. That's why there's one person who made it into the potential jury. It was the second to last one's got on, who I made a note on my side that this woman is a liar. Question 7 was, do you know anything about this trial? And as opposed to question 14 was, do you know anything about the House Select Committee? And question 16 was, do you know anything have you watched any part of the January 6th committee hearings? And you have the questions there.
See, yeah, I got a couple of them. Yeah, I got a couple of them here, so I was just going to read some of them for the audience here. But yeah, basically you nailed it, Joe. Yeah, it's going to be real small because I got this clip actually from go follow Julie Kelly if you want to get some of the questions. But yeah, you're right, Joe. Like number 16, right? Number 16, number 17. Number 16, do you have any beliefs or opinions about the defendant, Steve Bannon, or anyone associated with him that would make it difficult for you to remain fair and impartial to both the government and the defendant throughout the trial in this case, right? So, of course not. Like, that's like Donald Trump or anybody else. Number 17, as you sit here, do you have an opinion about the defendant's guilt or innocence in this case? The Select Committee is holding hearings at the event about the events on the Capitol. Have you watched or read coverage about those hearings? Right, is another one. And so,
but if you pull up question 7, that was the one that almost everyone said yes to.
Which one? So I don't have that one. Which one was that one?
Question 7 was, do you know anything about this trial? And did you hear anything about this trial? And almost everyone said yes. And there's one woman who said no to every question up there. And then the one thing, like, do you have to an attorney? And she's like, her dad is an attorney. Will it have any impact on you? No, I'm not. I'll be able to be impartial. And the judge was almost surprised because this is pretty much out of I don't know 40 people that came up there. This is the first one who said no on question 7. Like almost one said yes. Like what you don't know about the January 6th hearings? You don't know anything about that? So she's like, well, when I said I don't know anything about the trial, I meant. He's like, you don't know anything about it? You didn't hear anything at all? So she's like, well, I mean, everyone knows something about it. So, I just thought, do you think I know? Do I know a lot about it? I know that he's, and then she starts talking about all these things that she knows. And it's like, yeah, that bothers me. That bothers me that you're sitting there trying to skate past those questions. And yet there was no objection at all from the defense. She made it into the pool, and this was like we were running at this point, and I think they were getting tired because it was already 5 in the afternoon. And the judge said, like, look, I don't keep you here so late. I really just want to get these last couple of jury pools so we can try and get this 22 done today. So, and maybe that's what it is, or maybe they felt there wasn't enough there in her answers when she's like, yeah, I know a little bit about it. To me, that just makes me, her lying on the questionnaire makes me feel as if she's trying to skate past and not have anyone question her.
I wouldn't even qualify it as lying. It's just taking for granted what you think is normal to be not even noteworthy in answering these questions. But this is the question. Rob, Joe, did Bannon formally ask for a change of venue? And does this loaded question, does this not illustrate exactly why it's impossible to get a fair and impartial jury in the jurisdiction of DC for a DC issue?
So I don't know about the change of venue. Joe, you may know that one specifically. I don't think I saw a motion for a change of venue. I saw 3 motions for continuances. One of the big argument, regardless, is pretrial publicity and whether or not you can get a fair shake. So change of venue would be one way to do it, but also a continuance might be another way to do it. And a continuance is probably more likely to be granted than I think a change of venue would. But, it is honestly, I don't know what the point of a change of venue is or what the point of any of this is, right? If you can actually have a trial under these circumstances and say that it's legitimate and fair, I don't know what the point is of any of those other maneuvers, because it sounds like they're just like on the books, but they're not actually used in practice, because I can't envision another, think about some of the other trials that we've talked about here, right, on YouTube and elsewhere, but like the Derek Chauvin trial, right? Derek Chauvin was a national story and it caught a lot of media attention, but they didn't think that that was worthy of a change of venue or a continuance. That trial went through, right? I would say, like, this is as big as that was, right? This is a national story that has been going on for 17 months now. The president of the United States came out and said that what happened on January 6th in the State of the Union was the greatest attack on American democracy since the Civil War. Okay, so that means he forgot about Pearl Harbor and he forgot about 9/11, which were both on American democracy, right? He's saying in front of all of America during the State of the Union that 1/6 was the worst thing since the Civil War. And so now you've got the president, you've got Congress, you've got every single lever of power in this country dunking on this. Steve Bannon himself is a subject of many of these proceedings. He's shown up multiple times in many of the videos, and it's still the judge. And by the way, they have their last hearing scheduled, I think, Thursday next week or this week, maybe, when the Bannon trial might still be ongoing. Is it this week or next week? It's real soon.
I'm not sure when that's running. One of the questions they asked anyone who said that they watched the hearings. So they asked them if they saw Steve Bannon in any of those hearings. That's one of the things that they asked them. And almost every single one of them was like, they said they didn't remember seeing Steve Bannon specifically in the committee hearings. So I haven't been watching the committee hearings very much. I watched like a total of like probably 5 hours of all the hearings.
Neither is most of the world either, Joe. You're not alone.
I watched, Rob, I'm trying to think of when I stopped watching. It was after day 3. I didn't see Steve Bannon specifically shown. He's obviously named, he's obviously associated. But the idea is, like, with Chauvin, the issue was that it was a national story. But I think even within the jurisdiction, you could have gotten a fair sampling for a jury pool. Washington, We know the demographics, we know the
Yeah.
statistics, but even in the absence of this propaganda coming from all MSM, it would have been impossible because they were targeted by the attacks and they were the victims of it. And now they're going to adjudicate justice on the accused. The change of venue there is a no-brainer. If you think you're going to get a fair trial in Washington, I mean, we disagree on life, but I don't think that he asked for a change of venue, but the delay, fine, postpone the trial so that the damage control from the CNN hit piece, from the 3 weeks of congressional hearings, broadcast prime time, is done. I think that would only exacerbate it. So it's academic.
I'll ask you, counselors, if they did not move for a change of venue, would you not consider that malpractice?
You know, I don't know enough. I don't know enough about the change of venue sort of procedure in federal court to make a good opinion on that. I think it's pretty hard. I mean, so what Judge Nichols did here is he said that he's gonna correct this in voir dire, which is basically what you said he kind of did, Joe. He's every time that they filed a continuance or they wanted to make this about pretrial publicity, it all reverted back to voir dire. The judge said, I'm just going to go through, we're just going to pick the right jury. But as we know, right, federal jury selection is a lot slower than, it's a lot faster than non-federal cases, right? I mean, we saw like in Rittenhouse, it took a long time, right? And I think the same thing with the other trials that we've covered. So I think it's about voir dire. The change of venue for the federal rules, I think it's limited. It's not the first remedy for pretrial publicity, I guess. So I don't know that would necessarily equate to automatic malpractice. I'd have to look into that more, but it certainly feels that way. Why else would you have change of venue but for a situation like this? If you're not going to use it, what's the point of having it?
Yeah,
I would say I was looking today to see if they asked for a change of venue. I couldn't see that they did. I'm going to go ahead and say that they know Washington, New York, wherever the hell they're going to go, Bannon's getting convicted. They know it. It's a no-brainer, especially given what the judge has ordered. He's going to get convicted. Make it look as political as possible. Maybe ask for a change of venue and then get it dismissed and say, look, we have another grounds of appeal. Doesn't matter. He's getting convicted. They're going to exploit this and weaponize this for political reasons, legitimately so. Bannon was getting convicted anywhere. So he's probably better off getting convicted in DC so that people can cry political foul as opposed to transfer to Idaho, I don't know where. And then he still gets convicted. And then what are you going to say then? So I'll say it's practice to not ask for it.
So you're agreeing with me that to a certain degree that Bannon is feeling like this martyrdom, that if he gets convicted, that he looks like a martyr and that it ultimately benefits him in the long run.
Martyrdom implies intent of the individual. I don't know whether or not he should have asked for it. It doesn't matter. I think they've all come to grips with the fact that he's getting convicted. He's going to go to jail for a month or two or whatever. And so better it be in DC, because at least then you get to blame it on the system as opposed to, okay, you're going to go to whatever jurisdiction, still get convicted because it's pretty black and white given the deprivation of defenses, and then say, well, now I don't get to weaponize it for the same political purposes. But I don't know if this was his long game all along.
Well, part of one of the things that I was sort of playing around with that I think that would not be crazy if we saw it would be the defense to not really put up a case at all, just object from the very beginning, right? They basically have no witnesses. So all of their subpoenas that they issued to Nancy Pelosi, and they wanted basically the entire J6 committee to come out here. All of those subpoenas are quashed. They're denied. They're not happening, right? So he doesn't really have any witnesses. He doesn't really have any evidence because a lot of his arguments about malicious prosecution, those have all been dealt with with motions in limine, and he can't make the estoppel argument saying that he was just following DOJ guidelines. So he's like really, really limited. And we talked about this earlier on your channel, Viva, where the defense attorney basically made that comment to the judge and said, maybe it's not even worth having a trial, or what's the point of defending my client? So one thing that I was thinking maybe could happen, right, is he gets up there, the government presents their case in chief, he objects, he makes his motion and makes his argument and said, judge, I cannot present a case this is ineffective assistance of counsel because of some of the rulings that you've made, and just kind of stops, right? Because he really can't present much else on an appeal. Then he goes up on appeal and he says, look, judge, we never even had a trial, right? I couldn't do a trial. I didn't even attempt to do a trial. Steve Bannon should not be somebody who is prejudiced as a result of my ineffective assistance of counsel. So almost like the lawyer throwing himself under the bus in order to save the client. As it goes up, the court says, you're right, you really didn't get a fair shake. And then it comes back down on appeal on a motion for a new trial.
I don't buy that one. I don't buy that one. I don't think that ultimately is it possible? Yeah. Do I really think that it's about like we want to try and win an appeal? Because if you win on appeal for ineffective, first of all, ineffective counsel is almost impossible to win on. There have been cases that I've been told that I haven't read them up myself, but I know on other streams when this conversation has come up, I've heard from other attorneys like Nick Makeda saying like, you could literally have an attorney who's asleep, like snoring during the trial, and you won't win on ineffective counsel. So to bank on that as being a way that you're going to backdoor your way out of it, I don't really buy it. And even if he did, all that would do is buy him a new trial, and then he loses the new trial. He wouldn't. That's not. You don't get not guilty for ineffective counsel. You just get a brand new trial at best. So I don't see the upside to that. I would say that maybe we could tell what his motivation is, depending on whether or not he pleads the fifth. If he pleads the fifth, that's his way of saying, I don't want to have anything to do with this trial. I don't recognize that anything about what happened here. And I think then I think I would feel confident saying he's intentionally playing martyrdom here. And if he gets up and testifies, the only way he has a chance of winning. Either you disagree with me that the only way he has a chance of winning is if he gets up on the stand and makes a really compelling argument as to why it is that he ignored these subpoenas.
Those defenses are struck. He's not getting up. He's not getting acquitted. And I'm just looking at Dracula says convicted for what? And Lance Miller says Bannon convicted. I'm not over. He's getting convicted, people. Love him or hate him. He's getting convicted. He got a subpoena. He didn't abide by it. And he has been deprived of any argument as to why he did not. He's getting convicted. The only question is going to be sentence. Ineffective counsel, I think, is the worst of the appeals argument. He's basically going to say this is a political witch hunt. At worst, I'll do 2 months in jail, and I'm gonna exploit this for political and other reasons when I get out. But the idea that he's not going to plead the fifth now, because he could have pleaded the fifth before and just respected the congressional subpoena and plead the fifth, but he didn't do that for whatever the reason. So he's stubborn, he's principled, whether you like him or not. That's what it is. But I don't think they're not banking on ineffective counsel for an acquittal. They know I think they know he's going to jail. The only question is for how long. Does he serve any time pending an appeal? And does he get pardoned if the appeal goes long enough for new administration to come in and pardon him?
Yeah. So let me come back again on that ineffective thing, because I agree with you, Joe. Like, there's not a lot of upside there if you just go in and you just sort of lose the trial, right? We're just going to lose this thing. But the framework that I was sort of operating from is what I've been seeing happening here is the DOJ is very aggressively pushing this trial to happen like now. Okay. Like right now, they want it right now. Same with Navarro. They want it to happen soon. I think because both of these are process crimes. The J6 crimes, they want to extend out, right? They want to push those out. So I think they wanted continuances in some of the other cases because there's exculpatory information that they have to disclose. This is really turning into a pretty big mess for them. And if they indict Donald Trump, then he's going to have a whole slew of discovery, right? If Donald Trump gets indicted, he's going to have all of the criminal procedures that apply to him. He's going to get all of the criminal discovery. Any of that comes out is going to then trickle down to all of the rest of the J6 defendants. And it's going to basically open and extend their cases for a very long period of time. It's really going to mess up all of their prosecutions, which is a whole separate can of worms, right? But the point of this is that we're seeing two different postures from the DOJ. On the J6 crimes, they're okay with pushing those out. With the process crimes with Bannon, they want those to happen very, very quickly. And part of what my thesis was on this, if Bannon, let's say, loses, he goes up, he gets a victory on appeal. There is I'm getting a little echo, a little feedback here.
It's not me.
Okay. So anyways, so let's say Bannon goes up on appeal. They drop They drop it back down for a motion for a new trial. New trial comes. The entire political dynamic might have shifted, right? The balance of power may have changed in Congress. So the Republicans might be in charge now when the new trial comes. Let's say the new trial takes place 1 year from now, because it's a whole new trial, whole new proceeding. We fast forward to November next year. Republicans are in charge. They disband this committee, or they withdraw the subpoenas of the committee, or something happens, which opens up some new arguments. So, right, this isn't a continuing crime, it's a new trial. And right, maybe if you have the committee that's not cooperating now with the DOJ, right? The prosecutors are working with the committee in order to prosecute these people. The subpoena came from the committee. Well, what if none of this stuff is cooperative anymore? What if the committee is not cooperating with the DOJ anymore at the time that there is a new trial? And this ineffective assistance argument is only just to kick it back down to the trial courts to wait it out again until the balance of power changes. So that's sort of that's the long game I was playing. Generally speaking, I agree with you. It's not a good tact, but there are situations, and we've done this at our firm, where we'll say, right, we got totally screwed on this case. And we make the argument that the lawyer is the person who should take the fall. We were ineffective, right? We've sort of encouraged clients to make ineffective claims against us because of the rulings that we got. And the client needs to communicate. The client shouldn't be the one who's adversely affected here. It should be the lawyer.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll tell you this much. I agree with you on this principle, and that is, he lost this trial last week. This trial was lost last week when he was stripped of all those defenses, many of which were really, seemed to be like, why should that not be an argument that a jury should hear? Why should they not consider whether or not, the executive privilege issues or the issues? I'm trying to think through the different arguments that he lost. I didn't really even love the executive privilege one. There was another one that I thought was much. Oh, yeah, the whole thing as far as the committee not being. The arguments about the committee not being something that he had to respect because they were not a properly formed committee. Because here's the thing, and this is why I disagree with what Judge Nichols decided last week, specifically on that issue. Because don't tell me, because he limited, this is what was unfair. He said, with respect to executive privilege, I will only allow Bannon to weigh before the jury here questions about that relate to what he knew about executive privilege at that point in time. That's a fair perspective, because if you're judging, what's this trial about? The trial ultimately is, was he right or wrong for refusing to appear for this when he was subpoenaed before Congress? Well, in that case, you have to get into his state of mind. So if his state of mind, and what a reasonable person would do given his state of mind, so I can understand saying if there was executive privilege that you knew nothing about, that doesn't justify you not coming in. So in that case, I can understand the judge making that ruling. But at the same time, if his state of mind is, well, this committee is an constitutionally invalid committee, in that case, that too reflects his state of mind at the time. And he's like, look, I don't respect this committee because my state of mind at the time is there's no way a committee that's comprised of 8 people can possibly be constitutional. Why the hell would I have to follow a subpoena that they issue? So that's, even if he was wrong, since that's a reasonable state of mind for someone to take, if a jury finds that that's a reasonable state of mind to take, that should be something they should be allowed to consider. And stripping him of that defense, I thought, made it impossible for him to win this trial at that point.
I love how Joe adds an O in mind. It's like a mind. It's a MOIND. I'm jabbing you, Joe. It's fantastic. New Jersey, New York. It's in the state of mind. 100%. By the way, I understand, legally speaking, and for the white Mustang who says the guy on the bottom's a lawyer. 13 years of practice, baby. Yes, I'm a lawyer. The idea that the judge can say, as a matter of law, you're not submitting your legal defense to a jury, whether or not you thought executive privilege covered your refusal, that's a question of law, not a question of fact. Don't plead it to the jury. They preserved those grounds for appeal. Understood. He said executive privilege. He said I relied on professional reliance, OLC, Office of Legal Counsel, prior memos. And the third one, Joe, what was it? That
was whether the
committee's unconstitutional.
Yeah.
The judge, Nichols, relying on another judgment that said, look, the committee is allowed to do its work, so can't rely on that. all legal defenses, they can appeal. As a matter of fact, to the jury, did he receive the subpoena? Did he respect the subpoena? His mens rea will be a separate question of law for appeal. But people in the chat are getting offended by the idea that Bannon's going to get convicted and probably go to jail. He is, and he will.
I think it's a pretty foregone conclusion. I mean, something pretty big would have to happen, but I'm not sure that that's going to be the case. You know, there's a similar crime that a lot of people are more familiar with, right? This is a contempt of Congress charge, which most people are not ever going to be charged with. I got some audio again. Is that Joe? Joe, I'm gonna mute you real quick while I speak here, and then I'll bring you back up. So there's a crime that exists in most states. It's called driving on a suspended license, right? And Viva, as you were talking and sort of saying that there's a cut and dry analysis here, right? He got a subpoena. The court says it's valid. He didn't show up. Therefore, it's invalid. Same type of thing often happens in driving on suspended license cases. And so it's kind of an interesting analog to this, but it's really not that complicated, right? Like, you've got a license, you have to keep it valid. And in Arizona, they charge these as misdemeanors, just like Steve Bannon. They charge these as crimes. And so if you get pulled over and your license is invalid, the way that they prove this is going to be very similar to how they prove this in Congress. They're going to bring in a custodian of records. They've already got that person labeled, right? He is the House lawyer. He's the House. He's somebody from the House. They've already disclosed him as a witness. He's going to come out and he's going to sit there just like somebody from your MVD would, or your Department of Motor Vehicle Record would. They'd show up there and they'd say, hey, this is how we do things. This is how the rules work at the MVD. And this is why your license is invalid. It's going to be the same thing, right? This person's going to show up. He's going to say, I work at the Department of House of Representatives, and we're even more incompetent than the MVD is. But this is how we do things. And Bannon didn't comply with our rules. Therefore, it's illegal. And these trials are not that complicated, right? These trials are pretty simple. You have a couple witnesses, you have, a custodian of records. Bannon can get up there and speak, but I think the prosecutors are going to object to a lot of it. The judge may sustain a lot of it. And, it could be an uphill battle. And I think expectations are important. Viva.
Well, I mean, it's not an uphill battle. It's a fait accompli. But getting into the idea of driving on a suspended license, or let's just say driving under the influence. I didn't think I was over the legal limit. Not a defense, even though it affects mens rea. We say in Quebec, absolute responsibility. Doesn't matter whether or not you thought you were breaking the rules, you were. I don't know what contempt of Congress is under that 1938 provision. I think it's bordering on the absolute versus I don't know what the alternative is. Did you do it? It doesn't matter if you thought you weren't doing it. Did you do it? You had to do it. Show up and testify. You didn't. Now he's going to have to, it's an uphill battle to say, these are my legal reliances arguments, which from what I understand really tend to apply in tax issues and not compliance with subpoena issues. Imagine everyone on earth says, I don't think I have to comply with the subpoena, so I'm not showing up. Then it kind of loses the force of a subpoena. I didn't think I have to do it, and I didn't show up, and now, exonerate me after the fact. I could imagine this being sort of strict liability, but I don't know. But just so everyone is prepared out there, Bannon is getting convicted, my prediction. He's going to go to jail. The only question is, does he suspend his conviction and sentence under appeal and then get pardoned or get acquitted on appeal? That's the issue. But I think these are calculated decisions he's decided to make for whatever the reason. And Bannon's a big boy, and he's going to live with it, and he's going to make the best of it.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
He's still
yeah. I think it's possible that he's hoping to appeal this up to the Supreme Court and basically get the Supreme Court's get on his side. I don't think if I were in his shoes, I wouldn't have much stock that the appellate court for the DC is going to be any more favorable than district court level is, but that he figures that he has 6 judges, he needs to get 5 out of 6 of those judges to rule in his favor in the Supreme Court. And I think that's probably his best bet to win on legal basis. So if he manages to forestall execution of this, that's the only way I see him not spending any time in prison. But I'm with you guys. I think he's gonna end up getting incarcerated. I think it's coming. How long? Whether it ends up being 30 days, both of them served concurrently, or 60 days. or a year, or potentially up to 2 years, I don't know. But I don't think he'll end up serving 2 years. And I think that
I've realized
there have been a lot of people who have been politically connected through the last 100 years who have had a great deal of success through being incarcerated for a relatively short period of time. Some of them notoriously evil. There's one I'm thinking of who was notoriously evil, who became like wildly popular after his conviction and wrote a book while he was in prison. I'm not to draw comparisons. The other AH, but there have been other people who when they go to prison, that for short periods of time on what is, for all intents and purposes, a political conviction, that they end up having careers that skyrocket afterwards. And I think it's possible that that could be why he's not afraid. I in my heart of hearts, I really think that's part of it here. By the way, no one should think for a second I'm making any comparisons between him and any specific figures I may have just referenced. I definitely don't think of him that way at all.
Well, Joe, just to take the heat off of you, first of all, I realize I can lock this door and kids can't come in, which is fantastic. But I was tweeting it at what's his face, Justin Trudeau today, who was celebrating Nelson Mandela as he politically prosecutes Tamara Lynch, Pat King, and others. And then someone in the chat said, "You're not really comparing Pat King to Nelson Mandela." I was like, I didn't respond, but you don't have to compare one person to another to compare one entity to it. Political prisoners are political prisoners. They can be cool and marketable like Nelson Mandela, or they can be unpopular like Steve Bannon or Pat King. But a political prisoner is a political prisoner. And what we're doing right now is weaponizing the full prosecutorial power of the DOJ, combining it with the full prosecutorial power of a highly weaponized DC circuit. And he's going to go to jail. He might be saying, this is my price to pay, or this is my contribution to making sure that there's a red wave in November 2022. If the conviction will come before then, and this is my contribution to a rerun for Trump 2024. And he might be a bigger person than most, because I wouldn't go to jail for a week if I could avoid it.
Depends on the jail. It probably depends on the jail.
No, dude, I couldn't spend 2 days in Vegas without my family, and I had gambling, drinking, and hookers. Okay, like those, I could. I'm still. I want to get home.
I plan on asking Ron, because I don't know if I got a straight answer for you on this, Viva. When I saw that he met you, I was like, how did you hold back the urge to basically go over to Viva, grab my both sides of the head, and just start shaking his hair? Like, I was wondering if you gave it.
I met Ron. It was the first time I met him in person. It felt like we've known each other for years, and it felt like he had already been a friend. Kaczynski was someone who I had never met before, and it was a little more interesting to meet for the first time. James O'Keefe, dude, you're on the interwebs. Get your top on. But then I met Eliza Blue. I had dinner with Barnes again. It was great. It's fun meeting people you've only known on the interwebs in person. Joe and Rob, I'm waiting for the first time. It's going to be great.
It's going to be fun,
You never forget the first time, Viva.
Now, so by the way, Joe, just a technical question. Jury selection is not yet complete, right? It continues to tomorrow?
Well, technically not, but for all intents and purposes, it is, because we know that they've selected their pool of 22. They're going to be doing the peremptory challenges in chambers outside of our view, outside the view of the jury. And they're going to basically come out and tell us which of the 14 or 16 are left over, depending on how they do it. And everyone else is going to be sent home. The 22 were instructed at the close of trial today to basically act as if they are on the jury, not to talk to anyone about the fact that they're serving, that they're in this pool, not talk to anyone, to restrict themselves from checking any information about this case, and as much as possible to restrict themselves from social media, and to basically act as if they're in the jury. So yeah, while we don't know which of the 22 are ultimately going to end up serving, we basically know that opening arguments are probably going to be starting like around 10 a.m. tomorrow, and that they're going to come out of chambers at that point and let us know who's on the jury and who's going home.
And Rob, just I saw one chat that says, "Don't say hookers in front of your child." Hookers in our family means one thing and one thing only: fish hooks for catching massive bass. What do you say?
Yes.
Nice. Nice.
Yes.
Get up,
Big hookers.
here,
Yes.
here. Oh, he wants me to wear my mask.
Well, Viva, let me give you one sort of alternative. I know you've got your hands full, and so before you jump out of here, one sort of optimistic alternative on this whole saga, if I may. So let me just flesh out maybe a potential that maybe long shot. Okay, like long shot. Like I'm not saying this, but like just toy with me on this one. Okay, so Bannon goes, he gets convicted, right? He gets convicted on this thing. He has sentencing. He goes, let's say we get an appeal or something interesting. Sentencing comes. They delay the incarceration pending the appeal, right? So he's sentenced. He's got some time, or they postpone sentencing. Many continuances on the sentencing proceeding. So he doesn't actually, go into custody. Then we fast forward, and there's an election, and the Republicans take over, and the committee is disbanded, or they take it over, right? They sort of take it over. They launch their own investigations, their own inquiries. They go after all of the Democrats. We start getting more and more records. This case, we uncover something. Maybe something happens with the juror. And the point is, we get new information in the context of a new Congress that is now Republican controlled. We get a motion for a new trial on an appeal. We get something that happens, and Bannon wins. Bannon comes out ahead, doesn't go into custody, doesn't serve any time in jail. The whole thing just gets legaled up the wazoo until there's a balance of power change. And, he maybe Trump wins and he gets pardoned. Maybe all the J6ers get pardoned, all of that down the line, but it gets postponed long enough that it doesn't actually result in any.
Well, by the way, what's 2 months in jail for the last 2 years of torture? I mean, Rob, I think that's the idea. Is that Please stop for a second. I think that's the idea. Is that ultimately he will never serve a day in jail. All of this will serve as galvanizing the base for the midterms and for the 2024. If it turns out to be the predestined injustice that we think it's going to be, not injustice because he didn't do what he did. He did it. But the fact that Sussman gets acquitted and he'll get convicted and serve time, that's the injustice, a two-tier system. So, Rob, I agree with you. I think that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. I think that's certainly what he's hoping for, and it's realistic because we know that even if he is convicted here, we know that until there's a sentencing, that's certainly going to be at least several weeks, if not several months, and it's very possible. And basically, what you're banking on there is two things: that they'll wait for a decision on the appeals before they actually make him before they execute on the conviction, and that he'll win on those appeals. And I think that's far less of a long shot. I think that's a reasonable possibility. Although I would not bank on it happening, but I think that's a reasonable possibility. That's a reasonable pathway to see how he won't end up serving any time here.
Yeah, or he serves his 2 months. He gets a pardon, and he's a political hero in 2024, and it all turns out to be all for the better for Bannon and for the party.
Yep.
I do think they really want him to serve time. I really think that they're going to be aggressive with this sentencing, and I don't think that the judge is going to be inclined to postpone it based on what I've seen from him thus far. He's really not continuing this stuff out, and so I'm not super optimistic about that whole path that I just laid out. But I do think that there is a potential for that, and if the power dynamic changes, right? One of the big arguments that the committee was making is that Bannon broke the law on the 7th and on the 14th when he didn't show up to court, right? When he didn't show up to the committee to communicate with them, that was the breaking of the law. But I think you might be able to read that a little bit differently based on some of the conversation. The committee sort of allowed him to continue conversations with them. They sort of acted as if he wasn't in immediate violation of the law. And so you get a little bit of a balance of power change, and you get a lack of cooperation amongst these. They're basically two prosecutors, right? It's the committee and the DOJ, which is not how it's supposed to be. You're supposed to only have one prosecutor on this thing, not two branches of government going after you. So now if they're not cooperating with each other and Bannon buys himself some time, maybe there's something, or like you said, right? He becomes somebody who takes one for the cause, and that animates the entire base. And you have a lot of very, very focused, highly motivated individuals for the 2022s. And then again for 2024s. And that's powerful, right? That's a dangerous.
You forgot a third prosecutor, the jury.
The jury. Yeah, that's right. The DC.
Rob, I don't know if you're carrying on with the stream tonight.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'll wrap up and say goodbye to some people, and I'll do some comments from our locals community. But gentlemen, I was so nice to have you both, and I know Joe, you're on the road and you've got your own channel to attend to, so I really appreciate you being here.
Joe, boots on the ground, Lawgic in DC.
Tonight on my show, with Lawgic, I have a meeting tonight. I basically plan on tell through each of the jurors, the potential jurors that came up there, and how those played out, and share with you whatever I had from behind the scenes with the various individuals who I happened upon today. So, not that anyone could figure out who any of them are based on our conversation here so far, because it's totally impossible. So.
No, that's going to be great. Yeah. So Joe did great work for our audience here. When you would send us some clips in of the GM case, right? And you were there, on the ground there in the GM case. And so, your reporting is awesome. So please go check out Joe's channel. Joe is also right next door to us on Locals, as is Viva. And so we'll be checking in with both these guys throughout the rest of the trial. And Viva, can you tell us what you're working on? Because you're sort of all in on this too.
I'm going to be streaming at some point tomorrow. Just whatever the news updates are of the day. Sync's clogged again. I'll be streaming whatever is the news of the day, and then producing or shooting an exclusive for the Post Millennial Daily Update, which is why I'm picking both your brains and shouting you out in as much as I can in the evening, and that'll be the routine for the week. So. VivaBarnesLaw.locals.com, Viva Fry, and that's it. I'll be on Twitter.
All right, gentlemen.
I'll see you tomorrow. Godspeed.
All right, gentlemen. Shout out.
Rob.
Thank you, Viva. Thank you, Joe. Off to you both. All right, everybody. So those were, of course, Viva Fry and Joe Neerman. They're over at Good Lawgic on YouTube, and Viva Fry, of course, you can't miss either of those guys. We're grateful for them joining us and having that conversation. Joe is there, of course, reporting with boots on the ground. And so let's just do a quick recap and see where we're at, because what I wanted to do is read through some of the locals comments. And because I'm using this new software, I think I missed all of, there were some super chats that I was able to get, but I think I may have missed them. If I missed your super chats, I'm going to try to piece those together and attend to those tomorrow. But let's jump over to the locals comments thread here. I'm opening this up right now. And let's see what we've got. We've got a bunch of comments here from our locals community. We have Vientikiss was here. He says, in case you don't see this, hello from Tennessee. He's going to be catching the stream later on. We've got 668 Anton says Arizona is in the house. John McGarvey says, at what point will we realize that common sense is not all that common anymore? Over from locals. Here's a comment from Hand of Nod. He says, Rob, good evening. I tuned in for part of your morning message. Let me see if I can clean this up a little bit here. I tuned in for part of your morning message. Why is this all? There it is. Just as there is tension between success and happiness, there is a choice between the un and misinformed. Electronic Arts released a really cool game called Soviet Strike, Nuclear Strike. During one of those briefings, an NPC says, now what you don't know can kill you. Our daily existence in the US is broadly comfortable, even luxurious compared to other parts of the world. It's a product of many generations before us making choices. Some were good, some not. A few poor choices, even without malice, can push humanity back to sticks and stones. I think this awareness is what drives my anxiety about Ukraine. For the duration of the Cold War, humanity was careful and respectful of weapons, nuclear weapons, whereas now Congress is tied up in knots over questions of sex, gender, the right to life. It's contemptible. I would much prefer an electorate of critical thinking citizens than sheep. Somehow Joe Biden collected the most votes of any POTUS. Now he's displacing Jimmy Carter. Hopefully he stumbles to a legacy better than Woodrow Wilson's. Stay vigilant. Hand of Nod. Over from our locals community, Miss Lucky is here, says we're coming in loud and clear now. Along with Albion Thailand says Thailand is up early. Shout out from Thailand, international show. Fresh Eye says, when a judge's pretrial rulings are so egregiously bad, why cannot the defendant go straight to the Court of Appeals to try to get them reversed? So it's a great question, Fresh Eye. And in fact, you sort of can. It's called a special action. And a special action is sort of like you pause the trial and you then take it up to the Court of Appeals on one particular issue, right? It's called a special action. And it's sort of like an appeal in the middle of a case. but it's not something that's regularly used all that often. So that's probably why you haven't seen it yet. But if it is, like if it's something massively consequential for the trial, then the judge may consider that special action up on appeal. We had another one coming in from Thunder 7, says the NWO is collapsing. That's why they have to keep up the pressure to try to destroy Trump. Estonia Prime Minister quit. UK Prime Minister quit. Italian Sri Lanka President quit and fled, as per your videos. It's true. Macron is losing with the passport and will probably quit soon. Netherlands, Germany farmers are rising up against their tyrannical governments. Their leaders will quit soon as well. NWO, who control Biden, need to throw everyone under the bus, including Bannon and others who weren't even there. Get ready for your summons soon, Rob. You're clearly an insurrectionist for discussing legal points and objecting to their show trial. Good one there from Thunder 7. Another one says, I missed the Viva coverage today as I was working, but I'll watch it later. Really glad you're teaming up with him to get Bannon the coverage he deserves with intelligent, unbiased lawyers. I'm so sick of Trump loyalists or supporters being singled out. It's going to be great when the GOP takes over in November and real criminals like Nouncey, Bowser, Shifty, Cheney all get that good karma that is coming their direction. The Anticus said, Rob, just something I thought about while watching the chat. Didn't Bannon buy a World of Warcraft gold farming business from someone in the Obama administration? I don't have any idea. I don't know. The World of Warcraft gold farming business? I mean, I doubt it. Maybe he did. I don't know. From someone in the Obama administration. I have no idea, Vianticus. I don't know. All right. Jeff Rook says, Rob, is there any legal recourse for what we're seeing related to a city ordinance fine? I joke with my mom today that while I'm pretty confident about handling contracts between private entities, as soon as the government gets involved, they can just do whatever they want. So you just have to hope they decide to be nice. It's true. I know citizens have sued the government and won, but I'm curious what you'd say is the success rate against the government, specifically on cases where you believe the non-government party has the better case. Is it as one-sided as I would suspect? So yeah, it's really hard to sue the government. It's really hard. You have to, oftentimes you lose your, look, the government writes the rules, okay? They're going to make it difficult for you to beat them. So they do that. And one of the things they do is they make you have to file a notice of claim, at least here in Arizona, right? You have to file a notice of claim within 6 months. If you don't file your notice of claim within 6 months, you don't get to sue them. Like you just don't. That's it. Right. And oftentimes you'll see that like people will not realize their harms come from the government until much later after the fact. And so they'll try to even preclude you from suing them because of what's called the statute of limitations, saying that it's just too far removed from the incident and you can't recover. Says, didn't realize how apt my question would be related to both Bannon and my family. How much impact does mens rea have on legal affairs with the government? I was talking to my mom today about how we can't at least show we're trying to abide by what they want us to do. Does mens rea have a greater impact when proactive than if it's brought up after an offense is being tried? So yeah, mens rea, it's a complicated topic. We spend a lot of time on this in criminal law. But remember, we got to define our terms appropriately. So here, mens rea in criminal law talks about a guilty mind, a mental state. We have two components of criminal law, two elements of a crime in most crimes, unless it's a strict liability crime. There are some crimes where you don't have to have a guilty mind, a mental state, a guilty mental state at all. It doesn't matter what you thought. One of the most common examples is statutory R crimes. Somebody is underage, an older person has intercourse with that younger person. That younger person is only 16. Person says, I thought she was 18. She had an ID that showed me she was 18. She was at a club that said 21 only. She was in there. None of that matters. ID doesn't matter. Club doesn't matter. What she showed you doesn't matter. She might have looked like she was 45 for all you know. Doesn't matter. She's under the age of consent, therefore illegal, right? That's it. It's called a strict liability crime. It means there's no guilty mind about it. You did the conduct. That's it. So here, right, Bannon is going to be making the argument that his mental state is relevant, that he sort of was relying on the DOJ, that he was relying on his lawyers and all of those things. But they're essentially going to say that was wrong, right? None of those excuses are valid. You still needed to show up. Mistake of law or mistake of fact, right, is not enough. It would just be like, well, I thought the speed limit was that. No, you were mistaken about that. That doesn't exonerate you of criminal liability, right? So that's how the mens rea is working in this criminal case. Good question, Jeff. Thunder 7 says, how long will the trial go on according to your expertise? And can Bannon appeal if he loses? Yes, so he can definitely appeal. And I don't know how long the trial is going to go because I don't know if Bannon's going to testify or not. He may not, right? This may be something where he just doesn't do anything. They have no witnesses. Trial could be over by this week. If the jury's out and they find a verdict within a few hours, right? I mean, it could be over by the end of the week. But it could not be. I don't know. We'll have to see. TOS says, let's see here. C. Reed says, hiya. You know I love ya and the show. Normally I love what Joe has to say, but the connection's bad. I can only hear every third or fourth word. So I'm off for today. First time in history that made the show. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. So C. Reed, look, I know the audio wasn't that great today, but we had, it's trial time, baby. This is trial time. We can't have perfect audio. This isn't the Ritz-Carlton, Sometimes you just got to throw all your crap in your suitcase and record a video from your car. That's just how it goes. So Joe is doing amazing work. I know the audio wasn't great, but he's doing amazing work. And so we wanted to make sure he got all the time in the world. Jeff says, it's worth it. I'll say I had to fight my OCD. Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So we love Joe and Good Logic, and he's going to come back. So we're just going to have to deal with it. TOS forever ever says, Rob, how awesome. The next level sharing your vlog, the next level sharing your vlog. You're the most. Question. Might Bannon be a person when nervous laughs? So his humorous persona is his nerves. It could be. Yeah, that's an interesting comment. So saying that, maybe Bannon is just being sort of jokey and laughy about this whole thing because he's petrified. I don't think so. I've listened to enough Bannon. I don't think he's nervous. I don't think he cares. Honestly, I think he knows the writing's on the wall on this thing, and it is not even. Well, he's probably sleeping well at night. He's probably like, oh yeah, perfect. Oh, this is comfortable. Love this. America's going to be saved. And the Democrats are digging their own holes. I really think this is more problematic for them than it is helpful long term. TOS Forever says, good evening, Rob, Marvin, tech team, and watching the Watchers community. Saying shout out to everybody from TOS Forever. The Antikiss is here. Says, Rob, a thought before I get dragged out to dinner. V is traveling around the world right now, and he is still holding the fort down with some of this mod activity and some of these beautiful comments. He says, a thought before I get dragged out to dinner, and probably spawned in part from lack of sleep. The times we live in now are overtly based off the idea that might makes right, the general's point of view in the Republic. Previously, it was always passive and operated under a guise of people being equal. As dumb and lazy as people can be, the general populace will never believe words over blatant actions. On top of that, there will always be those desperate to obey. I don't have my clip of rollerball handy, but remember the line, believing comfort is freedom. Those are the vehemently obedient. I have my hopes and doubts about the general populace. I've always observed the human race to realistically be a collection of cults with a few free thinkers sprinkled in. There are two decisions one can make in the face of adversity. One can make the world weaker to suit the self, or one can make themselves stronger to survive the world. I prefer the latter, especially in those times of might makes right. Good comment there from the Antikiss. And this got me thinking about something that, something I've been paying a lot of attention to, sort of the great bifurcation of society. And I think what the Antikiss is talking about hits on that, right? There's a collection of cults with a few free thinkers sprinkled in. And a lot of people are desperate to be obedient. They're vehemently obedient, right? They love to obey. They love to stay home and put their masks on. They love to go out there and tell everybody else that they're killing grandma if they don't do the same, right? And it's control me. If you can have somebody control you, your life can be pretty easy, right? Because you don't really have to think or do much of anything. Somebody else makes all the decisions for you. You just show up, you watch the news program, you go back down to your friends and you scream at them, science, 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 because that's what somebody on CNN told you to say. Mr. Pastuilo says, hey, Rob, if this committee is illegal, why don't the people in the House make more of a stink? Or even in the Senate, they should be saying every day, like what you say, this committee is illegally founded. Well, I don't disagree with you there, Mr. Pastulio. I don't disagree with you. Now, there are some people who are making those arguments. Even McCarthy submitted an amicus brief. They are making some of these arguments legally in the court of law, but they're also not very active on this thing. I don't think that they care. I think that most Republicans would be A-okay if Donald Trump never came back again, right? Do you think McConnell Do you expect McConnell to get up there and defend Donald Trump or Steve Bannon or Peter Navarro or anybody? No, of course not. They hated him. They may have been in on the whole thing for all we know. I don't know. TOS Forever says, question number 2, might Bannon serving an unconstitutional sentence by an unconstitutional committee be set up for impeaching and removing the DC circuit? They are not a state in the union, so they are acting like a foreign nation. It's a great question, TOS Forever. Personally, I am pro disbanding DC. I've said this for a long time. I think the DC is not necessary anymore. We can keep it symbolically, right? We can keep it as like a vestige of our heritage there. But as a functional state, as a functional entity or a district of Columbia, no, doesn't need to be there anymore. Congress people, they can zoom into their meetings. We should go back to the original numbers for the House of Representatives as well and boost those numbers up, because that will really slow things down big time. And then we divest all of the power from that centralized location. All of you senators, all of you representatives, go back and spend time with your people. We know you hate them, and we know you don't care about them at all, but it's your state. So you got to go back and do your business from there, rather than going around and palling around with all of the litany there in DC. Now, this has been a point that Newt Gingrich brought up when Newt Gingrich was running for office some time ago. One of his points was that he wanted to disband the what was it? Ninth Circuit. Newt Gingrich didn't want them around anymore. And that's possible, right? You can actually, the Congress actually sets the jurisdiction of the courts. So if you had a very strong Republican Congress and a Republican president, they could just say, yeah, the DC Circuit, no, we don't need it anymore. We're going to narrow in the judicial jurisdiction. And if you read the Constitution, they have the power to set it. So they could do it. They could eliminate the DC Circuit, and they should. It's useless. Here's another one from the Veil. Hey, Rob, can Bannon file a claim that the judge is partisan and unable to fulfill his duties as a neutral judge? Yeah, he could. He could file, well, there's several things that could happen. He could file a notice for a change of judge, alleging bias or alleging something, problematic. Unlikely that that's reality. The judge seems like he is pretty neutral, right? So the judge actually is not doing anything that seems like he's a maniac, right? Nothing like that. A lot of rulings, I think, are highly prejudicial towards the defense, but there's nothing that's been sort of so egregious that it would be outside the ordinary. But you could, right? You could always file a judicial complaint. You could always file a motion for a change of judge, notice for a change of judge under the rules. And the only real remedy there, the only thing that would provide you is a new judge, right? You get a new judge, but you still get the same DC Circuit and all of the jurors. Miss Lucky and Sergeant Bobber here says government has unlimited lawyer money. Average citizen does not. Hard to sue the government for that reason, I think. It is true. It's really hard to sue the government, and it's hard to win against the government. I mean, this is the reality for every defendant who has to go through the justice system, right? They get a lawyer who's oftentimes a public appointed attorney who has a lot of cases, and just, and I love public defenders. I have nothing but nice things to say for them, but sometimes the level of representation that a defendant gets through the public system is different than what they would get through the private system. Okay. That's why I work in the private system, because I have a different vision for what it should look like. But the point is, it is still a massive balance of power difference. Okay. Somebody hires my law firm. They hire our firm for, thousands of dollars. Great. We can invest all of that into their defense. The government has millions of dollars, not thousands, millions. And they've been building their systems for years, and they've got every single lever that they can turn. And they also pay the same paychecks for the prosecutors. They pay them to the judges. They pay them to the cops. They pay them to everybody, even the public defenders, right? They're all on the same payroll. And so what that results in are systems that just want to process people, just churn and burn people, just treat them like names and case numbers on a manila file, and they just shove them through the system. And I've got a really big problem with that. It offends me when we have to think about people not getting a fair shake going through our justice system, because it is their liberty that's being stripped away from them. They are going to prison. It is their natural rights that are being stripped away. And so I know that these J6ers and the people behind this movement are very excited about removing their political enemies. And they think that this is just a big playing field. Like this is just a game of chess and they're going to win. I don't think that's the case here. This is all unprecedented. This committee doesn't resemble any of the other committees that we've looked at. 9/11 committee, the Watergate committee, pick a committee. There are adversarial questions being asked. There are checks and balances on their operations. None of that is happening here. Heffalumps Woozle says, always good seeing you working with Viva. He was here in Vegas at Freedom Fest this weekend. I expect to see you as a speaker next year. So I didn't even know about it, but I'd love to attend. I love freedom. And a fest full of freedom. First of all, I can't believe that I wasn't even there this year. I'm a little bit mad about that. Not as a speaker, obviously, but maybe sometime in the future. All right, my friends. And those all came over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And let's take a look at some of these YouTube super chats that came in, because my goodness, we haven't attended to any of those. Now, I do need to apologize because my chat thing, so I can pop open certain things up on the screen like this one. So like here, Stace on the Case says they just print more, but I can't see all the super chats. Here's one. Here's K Bean. K Bean said, super chat, Rob, I still don't understand how Congress can act as a judicial branch, not a court of law, but can issue criminal charges and jail time. Yeah, so it's a great question, K Bean. And the reason why you're having difficulty with this is because that's not how this is supposed to work. This whole thing is ridiculous. Congress is not the judicial branch. Congress is also not the executive branch. And the way that this works, the normal operation of criminal charges is it goes through the executive branch. You've got the FBI, they investigate crimes, the DOJ, right? It's all part of the executive branch. So we've got Congress, they write the rules. We have the courts that tell us what the rules say. And then we have the executive branch that goes and executes the rules, right? Congress writes the laws, the court says what the law is, the executive branch executes the laws. So Congress really should pass a law. The executive branch should execute it. What's happening in this case, K-Bean, is sort of not that, right? Congress created its own law sort of with their HR 503. Then they staffed their committee. Then they said on their own that sort of this was a violation of their statutes. So they're almost acting as a grand jury, right? They're almost writing a rule and then determining that there's been a breach of the rule, which is not their job. Okay, the determination of the breach, that's the execution of the law. That goes over to the executive branch. So Congress doesn't get to say, you broke our law, and now we're going to investigate you, right? That's not their power. That's the executive branch power, and they have usurped that. In a normal functional operational government, the executive branch would hit the congressional branch with an elbow, and they would say, hey, that's our power here, jerks. You can't usurp our executive branch power, and so you can't go and do these things. We're going to prosecute the crimes on our own. The problem here, of course, is that Merrick Garland's not going to indict Donald Trump. Maybe he will, but the committee is having to turn their arms to do it, and they're trying to create enough public fanfare about this that it becomes sort of a foregone conclusion that Donald Trump does ultimately get indicted. But it is not appropriate, right? This has been my main argument. It's not appropriate on a foundational level to have Congress prosecuting people. The way that they're getting around it is they're saying, we're not prosecuting people. We say that a law was broken and they refer that over to the DOJ. The DOJ then picks it up and challenges it and runs with it. But if you had an adversarial DOJ, like let's say Trump was still in the White House or a Republican was in charge, their executive branch would not take this stupid referral from Congress and run with it, because they would proffer a different set of arguments. They would say, that is not your power to do it. Your committee is illegally constituted, right? And they would never move forward with it. But because they are in cahoots, they're okay letting the congressional branch take over some of their authority and usurp power. Good question from K Bean. Thank you for that one, K Bean. And thanks for modding up the place and holding the fort down. Another one came in from GN, says, popping this one up, says, we need neo-post-American revival. Well, I think that we're probably going to see that. I mean, things are always darker before the dawn, right? And out of difficulty often comes clarity. Out of trials and tribulations, oftentimes we see improvements, we see growth. And I am not doubting that that happens here. I think we're going to see a lot of that. I think that society is already resorting itself. Like, for example, we've got people chatting on Rumble now. We've got all sorts of alternative platforms popping up. You've got, Viva, who's hanging out with the War Room. And so, there are alternative, I think, voices popping up. And a lot of people in the media want to stop that. But it feels like they're losing, right? I think TOS Forever had a comment on that, right? All these prime ministers are resigning. The NWO is, I think, not having a good year, which is good for freedom, which is good for all of us. All right. And so that, my friends, I think is it for us for the day. Now, let me check my email real quick because I still don't have transcripts, which is not ideal because I really wanted those. Remember, with Michael Sussman, we broke this up into two parts. We got the morning transcripts, and then we often got the nighttime transcripts. And I don't even have the morning transcripts for today. So what I think is happening is the court reporter is just going to be sending them all over in one giant batch because that's how I got the last one, which is a little bit of a bummer. So I don't know what the schedule is going to look like tomorrow or if I'm going to get the transcripts tonight, but I will keep a lookout on those. And then we'll be back tomorrow night to recap what's going on with Bannon, and we'll do it all again, I guess. And we'll see what Joe and Viva are doing. So we'll leave it at that, my friends. I want to thank everybody for being here. Shout out to the Rumble crew. Anything, Pawana, FedCure, Larry 1 is over there, along with Hiker 7, Bastiat 1776. And I appreciate everybody over on Rumble. We're getting some good subscribers over there and making sure that all of our content's going out over there. Thank you to Rumble. Over on Locals, Jumpin' Jeff is here, along with TOS Forever, See the Veil. We have Jason on Blast from California. Shout out to Jason on Blast. TOS Forever, B-Spec, See the Veil, all chatting away. And then over on YouTube, before we wrap it up for the day, shout out to Truman HW. He says, what an outstanding episode. He says, you're a good guy. Well, thank you, Truman. I think you're the same thing. Holy F, my S-Stink says, great show. We have Just My Opinion, Charles DeMar, Earl Larson, Debbie Baker, and everybody else. Thank you so much for being here. Apologies for the technical difficulties at the start of the show. We'll get all of that sorted out for tomorrow. But that is it for me, my friends. I hope you have an amazing evening. You sleep very well. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye, everybody.